The profound inquiry into why the Vatican might have so vehemently sought to obliterate any potential descendants of Christ remains a haunting enigma. It is a question that has drifted through the annals of time, a specter too disquieting for public discourse, too perilous to be officially acknowledged. Yet its presence endures, a persistent whisper across the ages. This profound query, rarely spoken aloud, surfaces in the enigmatic margins of forgotten manuscripts, in the cryptic symbolism of ancient carvings, and in the hushed traditions carefully passed down through generations. For centuries, the ecclesiastical authority has steadfastly proclaimed Christ as the eternal Son of God, a solitary divine entity, unequivocally without any earthly progeny. This doctrine is not merely a belief, it is a foundational pillar. Indeed, this unwavering conviction forms the very cornerstone of its immense authority, the unyielding bedrock upon which the vast edifice of popes, ecumenical councils, and magnificent cathedrals has been meticulously constructed over millennia. For if, against all official declarations, Christ had sired children, if his sacred bloodline had miraculously persisted, then the ultimate spiritual and temporal power would not reside exclusively within the hallowed halls of Rome. Instead, it would surge and pulse through living veins, a tangible legacy of flesh and blood, an inheritance that no ecclesiastical decree or imperial edict could ever hope to extinguish. Consider, for a fleeting moment, the staggering implications of such an alternate reality. A Christ acknowledged to have left heirs would inevitably give rise to powerful dynasties asserting an undeniable divine descent. Families who could legitimately stake a claim to both spiritual and political suzerainty, not through the bestowal of papal blessing or intricate theological argument, but by the irrefutable right of birth. The venerable Church, in such a scenario, would irrevocably cease to be the sole custodian of divine authority. It would find itself confronted by formidable rivals, perhaps even individuals of superior spiritual legitimacy, walking among the populace, their very existence a challenge to established order. Thus, the narrative circles back to the profoundly haunting question that echoes through the ages. If such a sacred bloodline did indeed exist, would not the Church have deployed every conceivable measure within its vast power to conceal it, to utterly silence any mention, to bury its very memory beneath an impenetrable stratum of centuries of evolving doctrine and historical dust? The unfolding tapestry of history, upon closer examination, offers compelling reasons to contemplate this chilling possibility. From the earliest ecumenical councils, where a diverse array of alternative gospels and theological interpretations were systematically dismissed and condemned, to the relentless ferocity of the Inquisitions that mercilessly punished even the faintest whispers of heresy, the Vatican has waged an unceasing battle. This conflict was not solely against perceived sin or doctrinal error, but crucially against narratives, stories that directly imperiled its tightly held monopoly on divine truth. These were stories positing a Christ who was not merely ethereal spirit, but also a tangible Father, whose profound teachings might have been perpetuated not solely through spoken words or written scripture, but through the very existence of his own progeny. And precisely at this juncture, a profound paradox emerges, shimmering with unsettling implications. It is a curious truth of human nature that the more vehemently a concept or a reality is denied, the more insistently one begins to perceive its lingering shadow. Why, indeed, Would such formidable walls of silence be painstakingly erected if there were truly nothing of substance concealed behind their imposing facades? Why would an institution exert such immense effort to meticulously erase a narrative if there were, in fact, nothing truly significant to be forgotten? These questions hang heavy in the air, demanding consideration. Perhaps, then, the Church's most decisive and enduring conflict was not engaged on physical battlefields with clashing swords and unfurled banners, but rather in the chilling realm of silence, within archives meticulously cleansed by consuming fires, in ancient manuscripts suffocated beneath layers of censorious red ink, and most subtly, within memories deliberately and ruthlessly suppressed. It was a war waged not against opposing armies, but against the very notion of a sacred inheritance, a lineage that could challenge its carefully constructed dominion. It is precisely at this precarious precipice, where the boundaries of what is officially remembered blur with the vast expanse of what has been deliberately forgotten, that this compelling journey truly commences. This is a narrative woven from threads of immense power, profound fear, and impenetrable secrecy. The story of a bloodline that, against all odds, may yet move quietly and imperceptibly among humanity, a living echo of an ancient truth. As the shadows of history lengthen and night gathers, one must approach this enigma with cautious reverence. For in the profound silence that lies between the meticulously curated pages of history, the forbidden question relentlessly continues to whisper its unsettling challenge. The widely accepted narrative of Christ's earthly life, etched into the collective consciousness, culminates dramatically upon the somber hill of Calvary. There, a stark cross was raised defiantly against a darkening sky, a crown of thorns painfully pressed deep into suffering flesh, a singular, agonizing moment of ultimate sacrifice that has resonated with profound power through countless centuries of unwavering faith. Yet beneath the solemn, almost sacred beauty of this iconic image, a series of profound and unsettling questions have always persistently lingered, refusing to be silenced. Was that truly the definitive conclusion to a life that had irrevocably altered the world? Did the grand narrative truly draw to a close amidst the brutal finality of nails and an ensuing, profound silence? Or, conversely, was there something far more intricate, something profoundly significant, that remained deliberately unspoken, a chapter quietly omitted from the official record? While the canonical Gospels offer remarkably clear and detailed accounts of his death, his subsequent burial, and his miraculous resurrection, they become notably less explicit, even conspicuously vague, regarding the immediate years that followed these pivotal events. They provide scant information concerning the lives and ultimate fates of those who knew him most intimately, those closest to his earthly journey. Figures such as the enigmatic Mary Magdalene, the dedicated disciples, and the various families who journeyed alongside him through the sun-drenched landscapes of Galilee, all seem to recede quietly, almost deliberately, into the shadowy margins of Scripture. Their destinies remain shrouded in uncertainty, their personal narratives conspicuously left incomplete, fostering a fertile ground for speculation and alternative histories. Yet, despite the official silence, persistent whispers continue to echo through time. These whispers suggest that in the aftermath of the cross, not everything was irrevocably lost. Rather, a delicate yet incredibly enduring thread of his life continued, extending far beyond the confines of the tomb itself. Some of these tantalizing murmurs materialize within the pages of apocryphal texts, a collection of gospels purposefully not sanctioned by the early ecclesiastical authorities. In the ancient Gospel of Philip, for example, Mary Magdalene is strikingly referred to as his companion, a term that, in its original context, often implied a bond significantly deeper and more intimate than mere platonic friendship. In other suppressed writings, her portrayal transcends the conventional role of a mere disciple, elevating her to something far more profound, a figure undeniably closer, perhaps even bound to him in deeply personal ways, a connection deemed far too human, too earthly for the austere tenets of official doctrine. Could it be that a profound, yet deliberately unacknowledged love subtly sculpted the hidden, unspoken side of the Christian narrative? And if so, could it further be that from such a sacred union, a child was indeed born, an heir whose very existence would have fundamentally and irrevocably altered the entire trajectory of faith, forever rewriting its foundational tenets? The nascent early church, consolidating its power and doctrine, displayed absolutely no tolerance for such provocative questions or alternative interpretations. At pivotal councils, convened in the shadowed, echoing halls of antiquity, texts that dared to hint at too much humanity in the divine narrative were systematically set aside, vehemently branded as heretical, and condemned to either slowly decay in forgotten desert caves or to swiftly vanish into the consuming flames of bonfires. Orthodoxy, rigid and unyielding, was decisively chosen, and with that choice, an impenetrable cloak of silence was meticulously drawn over dissenting voices. Yet, a profound and crucial distinction must be made. Silence, however pervasive, is never synonymous with absence. Even as centuries inexorably marched onward, faint but persistent echoes of these suppressed narratives continued to resonate. They manifested as hushed stories, meticulously whispered within the secluded walls of remote monasteries, as ancient traditions carefully preserved and transmitted through clandestine secret societies, and as intriguing legends that subtly, almost imperceptibly, infiltrated the intricate lineages of powerful European dynasties. Always, the same compelling refrain echoed through these clandestine channels. Perhaps the brutal crucifixion on Calvary was not, in fact, the final chapter. Perhaps instead, it marked the clandestine genesis of a lineage so profoundly significant, so inherently dangerous to established power, that its very existence could not be openly acknowledged. If this audacious premise holds true, then the crucifixion itself served not merely as a tragic ending, but as an elaborate, sorrowful veil. Behind its somber fabric, meticulously hidden from the scrutinizing gaze of the world, a sacred bloodline quietly began its long, perilous journey. The very flesh of Christ, the living seed of ancient prophecy, a vibrant, breathing legacy. And if indeed such an extraordinary legacy truly endured, then the Vatican's relentless and protracted war against collective memory, its systematic suppression of alternative histories, begins to acquire a chilling, almost logical coherence. While the cross may have brutally silenced the man himself, the profound echoes of his extraordinary life and the potential for a continued lineage proved far more resilient and could not be so readily expunged from the human consciousness. In the earliest tumultuous centuries following the crucifixion, Christianity existed not as a grand, imposing cathedral, but as a fragile, clandestine whisper. It propagated quietly, almost imperceptibly, from house to house, disseminated through hushed songs intoned in hidden rooms, and communicated through enigmatic symbols painstakingly etched onto stone by trembling, devoted hands. The mighty Roman Empire had not yet embraced this burgeoning faith. Quite the contrary. Its emperors relentlessly hunted its adherents. Its soldiers ruthlessly scattered its nascent communities, and its devoted believers carried its tenets like a fragile, precious flame from one town to the next, often under the shadow of persecution. Yet even amidst these scattered sparks of burgeoning belief, persistent rumors began to circulate. Rumors of something even more subversive and profoundly dangerous than the faith itself, a tangible legacy of blood, a direct continuation of Christ's own line. Within the sacred confines of the Holy Land itself, certain ancient families quietly recounted narratives strikingly absent from the Gospels officially approved by the emerging hierarchy of bishops. These were tales of Mary Magdalene undertaking clandestine journeys, stories of children born in profound secrecy under the ever-present, watchful eye of Roman authority. They were narratives that spoke not merely of spiritual continuation, but of a tangible legacy of flesh and blood, a living continuation of the extraordinary events that had first unfolded in the verdant region of Galilee. Intriguingly, some of these compelling tales found preservation within what modern scholars now categorize as apocryphal writings. Texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Philip. All of these were decisively rejected by the influential councils that ultimately shaped the canonical New Testament. They collectively offered tantalizing fragments, intricate puzzles, and half-spoken hints of a nascent Christianity that gravitated less towards the establishment of a vast spiritual empire and far more towards a profound, personal intimacy, a deeper, more human connection to the divine. Within certain of these enigmatic texts, Mary Magdalene emerges not merely as a devoted follower, but as one who shared an intimate knowledge of Christ in ways that were perhaps too tender, too profoundly human to be comfortably assimilated into the developing orthodox narrative. Could it possibly be that the nascent seeds of a sacred bloodline were discreetly sown here, amidst an atmosphere of profound silence, deep secrecy, and pervasive fear? The earliest church fathers, grappling with the formidable task of defining doctrine, demonstrably wrestled with this unsettling possibility. Some, in recognition of her profound spiritual insight, even hailed Mary Magdalene as the apostle to the apostles. Yet others, perhaps driven by a desire to diminish her influence and conform to societal norms, sought vigorously to reduce her to the more conventional figure of a penitent sinner, mercifully redeemed. Through these deliberate narrative choices, her intrinsic significance was systematically diminished, and her authoritative voice was progressively and effectively quieted. But what if her true role transcended both the reductionist portrayal of a penitent prostitute and the more accepted, yet perhaps incomplete image of a mere disciple? What if, instead, she was the chosen vessel of a profound and meticulously hidden inheritance, a secret lineage destined to endure? Imagine, for a moment, the intimate, clandestine Christian gatherings held in the bustling cities of Antioch, the scholarly hub of Alexandria, or the Sacred Heart of Jerusalem. There, believers fervently prayed. They reverently broke bread together and in the hushed corners of their earnest conversations, a startling whisper quietly traveled, that the Son of God might also have been a tender father, that the ethereal kingdom of heaven, so often spoken of, might have been tangibly mirrored in the fragile, living body of a child. For the nascent church, still in its formative stages and fiercely contending for its very legitimacy and authority in a pagan world, such a revolutionary idea was utterly intolerable. It profoundly threatened the carefully constructed narrative of a singular, divinely unique Christ, utterly untouched by human lineage or any conventional worldly ties, a cornerstone of its emerging theology. If Christ had indeed left heirs, then the ultimate spiritual and temporal authority would possess an entirely different pathway, passing not through the carefully ordained succession of bishops and popes, but through the undeniable inherent right of blood. Consequently, the potent seeds of this disruptive story were systematically buried, pushed deep beneath layers of official doctrine and historical suppression. Yet, it is a universal truth that buried seeds do not simply perish. They lie dormant, hidden within the fertile earth, patiently awaiting the precise, opportune season to once again rise, to break through the surface and unfurl their ancient truth. And as the Christian faith inexorably spread outward, extending its influence into the imperial heart of Rome, across the rugged lands of Gaul, and into various territories where powerful emperors reigned and contentious councils endlessly argued, those persistent whispers did not, in fact, vanish. Instead, they traveled quietly, meticulously carried within the enduring traditions of certain families, safeguarded within the secluded walls of monasteries, and cherished deep within the hearts of those who intuitively believed the true story of Christ was far grander, infinitely more human, and undeniably more dangerous than the official church would ever publicly acknowledge. While the Holy Land served as the fertile soil for these initial, clandestine narratives, it was the vast expanse of Europe that would ultimately become their sanctuary and refuge. And with each succeeding generation, the potent seeds of this profound mystery continued to grow, subtly strengthening their roots. Among all the compelling figures who intimately walked alongside Christ during his earthly ministry, none has ignited more enduring speculation and profound mystery than the enigmatic Mary Magdalene. Her significant name recurs repeatedly within the pages of the canonical Gospels, yet always in tantalizing fragments, almost as if the sacred record itself was strangely reluctant to grant her a complete, undeniable presence, hinting at a deliberate omission. She stands steadfastly at the foot of the crucifixion, a loyal witness when the majority of the male disciples had fled in fear. She is present at the tomb, the very first individual to bear witness to the miraculous risen Christ, a moment of unparalleled spiritual significance. And then, as if by a deliberate, calculated design, she quietly, almost imperceptibly, fades into an enduring silence. However, silence itself, particularly when imposed, can be profoundly telling. For centuries thereafter, the institutional church meticulously recast her image, systematically shifting her pivotal role and significance like an array of manipulated shadows upon a vast wall. To some, she was diminished to merely a penitent sinner, a cautionary tale of redemption. To others, she was elevated to the status of a devout, yet ultimately subordinate follower. Yet, within certain suppressed texts, such as the compelling Gospel of Mary, Her voice remarkably rises with an undeniable authority, confidently teaching, engaging in theological arguments, and even, on occasion, gently but firmly correcting the male apostles themselves. This was a voice undeniably strong enough, and her insights profound enough, to deeply unsettle the carefully established patriarchal traditions of the nascent church. But what of her true importance? Her ultimate role in the unfolding divine drama was greater still, far exceeding these sanctioned interpretations. Indeed, some ancient whispers, persistent through the ages, adamantly claim that she was not merely a dedicated disciple, but a profound partner, an intimate companion, a trusted confidant, and perhaps even his wife. In the very same Gospel of Philip, she is explicitly described as the one Christ loved more than the others, and is depicted as a companion whom he kissed often. Words that paint a vivid portrait of a relationship of deep affection and extraordinary intimacy. The precise phrasing of ancient texts remains open to interpretation, yet a compelling notion persists regarding a profound connection. The bond between these figures may have encompassed not only spiritual dimensions, but also a deeply human element. Should this indeed prove to be the truth, the ramifications for historical understanding and religious doctrine would be truly immense. For it is through her, Mary Magdalene, that a sacred lineage could have potentially been established. Through her, the divine essence might have taken root and manifested not merely in allegorical narratives and fervent supplications, but tangibly in the form of offspring. One might consider the trajectory of her narrative subsequent to the crucifixion. Ancient legends recount her urgent departure from the Holy Land. Certain traditions suggest she embarked upon a sea voyage across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean, eventually making landfall upon the ancient coasts of Gaul, accompanied by a modest retinue of devoted adherents. In the sun-drenched regions of southern France, hereditary narratives persistently recount her enduring presence. Sacred sanctuaries are dedicated to the Magdalene, small ecclesiastical buildings where her appellation was frequently invoked, and even sacred artifacts purportedly belonging to her are venerated. A compelling question arises: what catalyzed such fervent adoration to flourish in that distant region, so geographically removed from the spiritual epicenter of Jerusalem? Could it be that she bore within her being something weightier than mere recollections? Could it be that she was the vessel for a genealogical connection, a sacred bloodline? The established church, naturally, exerted considerable effort to shape her public portrayal. To systematically diminish her historical significance was a strategic move designed to quash any potential assertions of a legitimate succession. If she were merely a repentant transgressor, she would be incapable of bearing progeny who held a special claim. If she were simply an ordinary disciple, she could not possibly compete with the foundational apostles like Peter and Paul, or indeed the burgeoning pontifical dynasty that followed. And yet, irrespective of the meticulous efforts to reconstruct her historical account and lessen her impact, her profound influence continued to cast its long reach. In artistic renditions across the ages, she is often depicted with fiery auburn tresses, a powerful signifier of intense feeling, hidden truths, and enforced banishment. Within the hallowed confines of cathedrals, her aura persists at the periphery, never occupying the focal point, yet perpetually resistant to obliteration. In subtly transmitted folklore and clandestine oral histories, She is recalled as possessing a greater significance than ecclesiastical doctrine permitted. Might it be that the ecclesiastical authorities harbored a profound apprehension concerning her? That concealed within the deliberate suppression of her voice lay the ultimate, most prescribed revelation of all, that she gave birth to the offspring of Christ, and that her progeny moved discreetly through the annals of time, their presence officially repudiated, yet persistently enduring, never completely vanishing. Mary Magdalene's enigmatic silhouette casts a vast expanse across the centuries, and within that profound influence, a fundamental query patiently resides. The question is not merely concerning her historical relevance, but rather whether her significance was so profound as to be deemed threatening, whether she mattered too much. In the centuries that followed the crucifixion, the vulnerable nascent faith that originated in humble rural hamlets of Galilee metamorphosed into an entity of immense scale and formidable might. Christianity, initially subjected to severe oppression, progressively established itself as the pulsating nucleus of a vast imperial power. And with this profound change came forth a novel demand, extending beyond mere proselytization, encompassing the critical function of governance and regulation. The Eternal City served as the epicenter of this transformation. By the time Emperor Constantine formally adopted the Christian symbol, the creed had transitioned from a belief system characterized by clandestine assemblies to a structured faith defined by grand ecclesiastical edifices and hierarchical leadership. The days of furtive supplications offered in dimly lit domestic settings were superseded by the resonant canticles of choristers echoing through opulent marble chambers. What had commenced as a narrative centered on humble aquatic laborers, pastoral guardians, and itinerant figures transformed into a formidable establishment governed by imperial rulers and ecclesiastical dignitaries. But with expansion came inherent perils. Dissenting narratives persistently resonated, voices that recalled alternative versions of the Messiah's life and teachings, voices that told of evangelical texts deliberately excluded from the official canon, voices that subtly alluded to a direct lineage that the ecclesiastical authority would find utterly repudiating. Contemplate the profound quandary. Should Christ have begotten descendants, then the Roman See would be unable to assert exclusive dominion. Celestial authority would not be localized within sacred artifacts or vested in the pontifical seat, but rather inherently within a genealogical connection, embodied by extant familial lines whose ancestral claim could stand in direct competition with any prelate, any imperial sovereign, any pontiff. Consequently, as the ecclesiastical structure solidified, so too did its deliberate policy of suppression. Ecumenical synods were assembled not only with the purpose of promulgating official doctrines, but also to enter alternative narratives. During the momentous assemblies at Nicaea, at Chalcedon, and numerous other less prominent convocations, prelates deliberated and cast their ballots to determine which texts would endure as canonical scripture and which would be condemned as heterodox beliefs. The officially selected evangelical accounts depicted a Messiah devoid of progeny, a Christ whose earthly purpose culminated with his crucifixion. The repudiated texts, conversely, frequently alluded to a figure possessing a significantly more terrestrial nature, one considerably less amenable to institutional management. The ecclesiastical institution was compelled to proceed with extreme circumspection. To concede the potential existence of a direct lineage would be to unleash widespread disorder and upheaval. Royal houses could assert their heavenly mandate through their corporeal ancestry. Monarchs could establish the legitimacy of their reign not via pontifical sanction, but by direct descent from the Galilean region. The intricate tapestry of authority meticulously constructed by the Vatican would swiftly disintegrate. Consequently, theological dogma became rigidly entrenched. The Messiah was formally pronounced as possessing inherent divinity, being everlasting, and entirely unblemished by worldly attachments. Mary Magdalene's status was systematically lowered, her importance curtailed, and she was relegated to the archetype of a repentant transgressor. Even the slightest insinuation of connubial union, of offspring, or of direct succession was unequivocally denounced as doctrinal error. Nevertheless, heterodox beliefs possess a remarkable resilience. Kin groups in ancient Gaul recounted narratives that actively defied the pronouncements of Rome. Ascetics residing in remote desert grottos secreted away ancient codices that presented alternative accounts. Within the clandestine corners of society, alternative interpretations of Christ's enduring influence continued to exist, subtly maintained, yet fundamentally intact. Thus, as the ecclesiastical institution solidified into the monumental structure of the Christian world, it simultaneously assumed the role of the deliberate designer of suppression. Every synodal assembly, every formal edict, every act of ecclesiastical banishment served not merely as a declaration of religious conviction, it constituted a systematic obliteration of competing narratives. And one cannot help but wonder if indeed there existed no substantive information to expunge. What then motivated such vehement efforts at suppression and eradication? As the 4th century unfolded, the burgeoning Christian creed had disseminated throughout vast imperial territories, but its diverse proponents articulated their beliefs with considerable disharmony. Certain factions proclaimed Christ as inherently divine from the moment of his inception, while others posited him as a mortal being subsequently sanctified. Some adherents adhered steadfastly to evangelical accounts that narrated a profound closeness with Mary Magdalene, whereas others preferred narratives that portrayed him as remote, ethereal, and entirely disconnected from familial ties. The prominent ecclesiastical leaders of both Rome and Constantinople recognized the untenable nature of this theological disarray. A vast dominion necessitated a singular, universally accepted verity, a unified statement of belief, and a consistent depiction of the Messiah. Consequently, formal synods were summoned, grave convocations where episcopal leaders engaged in fervent discourse, contentious disputation, and decisive ballot casting concerning the foundational principles of redemption. During the pivotal Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, conducted under the vigilant gaze of Emperor Constantine, theological principles were indelibly inscribed. The Messiah was formally proclaimed as being begotten, not created, and sharing a singular substance with God the Father. The theological concept of the Holy Trinity was definitively established, but the deliberate omissions from the official declarations held an equally formidable influence. There was a conspicuous absence of any reference to progeny, nor was there any validation of evangelical accounts that subtly alluded to a genealogical connection. Specific writings, including the revered Gospel of Mary, the insightful Gospel of Philip, and the enigmatic Gospel of Thomas, were systematically marginalized, unequivocally labeled as heterodox, and gradually consigned to oblivion through subtle means. This systematic methodology was reiterated over successive centuries at the significant councils held in Chalcedon and Ephesus, and even within the hallowed confines of Rome itself. Fresh statements of faith were meticulously formulated. Unfailingly, the identical modus operandi prevailed. Articulate with precision those tenets requiring absolute adherence, whilst simultaneously imposing strict quietude upon that which must forever remain unuttered. The portrayal of Christ as the perpetual sacrificial offering was readily embraced. Indeed. However, the depiction of Christ as a spouse or a progenitor was vehemently rejected. Never. What motivated such meticulous vigilance? What propelled such an insistent imperative to expunge particular narratives from collective memory? Is it conceivable that beneath the surface of those condemned evangelical texts resided a fundamental verity deemed too perilous for the ecclesiastical establishment to acknowledge? Namely, that the divine Son had traversed the earthly realm not merely as a redeemer, but as a mortal man, complete with a familial unit whose subsequent generations might even now quietly reside within society. Every ecclesiastical council transcended mere theological discourse. It constituted a strategic exercise of political power, veiled beneath the guise of religious supplication. The repudiation of a direct lineage served as a crucial stratagem for solidifying the authority of the pontifical seat. The systematic obliteration of rival accounts functioned as a protective measure for entrenched authority. For should an offspring of Christ have endured, if a particular lineage could establish its ancestral origins in the Galilean region, then the prelates of Rome would possess no exclusive claim to sacred power. Consequently, the formal statements of belief were formulated not merely as affirmations of religious conviction, but also as potent instruments of suppression. The act of intoning the Nicene Creed signified not solely an adherence to divine principles, but also an acceptance of those historical narratives that the ecclesiastical establishment had deliberately elected to relegate to oblivion. Yet beyond the grand ecclesiastical structures and the pronouncements of imperial authority, subtle murmurs endured. Kin groups transmitted unusual narratives through generations. Ascetic scholars diligently protected clandestine ancient texts. Folkloric accounts of a divinely connected lineage persisted in obscurity, even as the formal ecclesiastical gatherings exerted concerted efforts to obliterate them. The formalized statements of belief instructed the devout concerning the tenets they were obliged to accept. The deliberate absence of discourse, nevertheless, articulated its own compelling narrative, and indeed, this very quietude, in its profound implications, might ultimately constitute the most profound and telling statement of belief. A considerable number of evangelical accounts failed to gain inclusion within the official biblical canon. Indeed, a greater quantity of these texts was deliberately concealed than was formally safeguarded. These writings were systematically designated as apocryphal, condemned as heterodox, and labeled as perilous documents, consigned to decay within subterranean caverns, meticulously sealed within earthen vessels, or incinerated in conflagrations ignited under the direct mandate of the ecclesiastical authority. Nevertheless, a select few managed to endure the purging, and their ancient verses continue to exude the subtle fragrance of a truth long since relegated to obscurity. Consider, for instance, the intriguing Gospel of Thomas, comprising an anthology of pronouncements ascribed to the Messiah, mysteriously safeguarded within the arid sands near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. only to be brought to light once more in the year 1945. Its teachings expounded upon the concept of an intrinsic spiritual illumination, of sacred wisdom residing inherently within the individual, presenting an interpretation of the Messiah that was less contingent upon ecclesiastical governance and more profoundly intimate, more profoundly individual. From the perspective of the Roman See, an evangelical account of this nature constituted a grave and immediate threat. Within the pages of the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene is depicted not as a tearful transgressor, but rather as an enlightened instructor, a profound repository of sagacity, and a commanding figure whose pronouncements caused considerable disquiet among the male apostles. She recounts profound spiritual revelations of esoteric understanding, and in articulating these insights, she positions her own persona directly at the core of the Messiah's enduring influence, a position, quite possibly, of excessive prominence for the sensibilities of those ecclesiastical leaders who were determined to exalt the figures of Peter and Paul, and indeed the authority of Rome, over all other claims. Following these, one encounters the Gospel of Philip, replete with its enigmatic and subtly indicative phraseology. This text characterizes Mary Magdalene as the Messiah's close associate, an appellation imbued with nuanced undertones of profound personal closeness, possessing etymological origins that could readily suggest a marital partner. It even subtly alludes to acts of profound affection, actions that communicate both an earthly, corporeal love and a sacred, spiritual imperative. Supposing these evangelical accounts were not repudiated solely due to their divergence in theological doctrine, what if their active subjugation stemmed from their articulation of a narrative utterly unacceptable to the ecclesiastical establishment, specifically that the Messiah had existed as a mortal individual possessing a companion, and that affection, connubial union, and even offspring could have been integral aspects of his earthly existence? The promulgated justification for these actions was the imperative of doctrinal consistency, a singular depiction of the Messiah, an undisputed collection of sacred texts, a monolithic understanding of divine verity. However, such insistence on sameness frequently serves as a deceptive facade for underlying apprehension. To acknowledge diversity in interpretations was to court the peril of inherent inconsistencies. To concede such inconsistencies was to imperil the very fabric of the ecclesiastical establishment's dominion. Consequently, these evangelical accounts were consigned to oblivion, some quite literally interred, secreted away within arid desert grottos, hermetically protected against the ravages of millennia, their ancient folios lying dormant like historical repositories. Still other texts were subjected to immediate and absolute destruction, their charred remnants dissipating into an eternal quietude. And yet, the oppressive weight of silence proved incapable of entirely obliterating such notions. Subtle allusions to these suppressed gospels persisted, whispered in the hallowed corners of ancient monasteries, woven into the fabric of local legends within secluded communities, and referenced in faint, daring remarks by those few who ventured to recall. The formidable church had unequivocally declared them forbidden, yet prescribed narratives frequently possess an uncanny resilience, ensuring their continued existence. One might ponder if there was no inherent menace in these alternative accounts. Why were they not permitted to circulate? Why were they not allowed to be read in conjunction with the canonical texts? What peril did the ecclesiastical authorities perceive within these very words? except for the unsettling possibility that they might unveil a Messiah possessing an unsettling degree of humanity, deeply entwined with earthly connections, and intrinsically linked to a discernible dynastic succession. The deliberately suppressed theological writings convey profound messages not merely through their explicit content, but equally, if not more powerfully, through their deliberate exclusion. And in that profound quietude, one discerns a silence pregnant with unvoiced potential and speculative interpretations. Though the Church strove assiduously to quell dissenting voices and heterodox viewpoints, collective memory possesses an intrinsic capacity for eluding pervasive control, slipping through the cracks of even the most stringent suppression. Even as ecclesiastical synods issued condemnations and zealous inquisitors carried out fiery executions, vestiges of forbidden heritage discovered sanctuary in the most unexpected of locales. Among the dedicated custodians of this concealed knowledge were often monastic brethren, men sequestered within austere stone abbeys where the soft glow of candlelight danced upon the surfaces of meticulously prepared vellum manuscripts. Officially, their solemn duty was confined to copying only the officially endorsed Holy Writ, the canonical volume sanctioned by the Roman See. Nevertheless, the peripheral annotations and subtle embellishments frequently unveiled an alternative narrative. Through minuscule marginalia, enigmatic ideograms, and deliberate textual lacunae, faint echoes of divergent evangelical accounts and clandestine ancestral lines persisted. This was not an overt act of defiance, but rather a nuanced form of subversion, a quiet yet resolute resistance sufficient to ensure the continued vitality of these recollections. Another significant conduit for this clandestine heritage resided within familial units. Through the delicate medium of oral transmission, as ephemeral as a whispered exhalation, privileged information was conveyed across successive generations. In geographical areas beyond the immediate ecclesiastical dominion of Rome, amidst the undulating hills of Occitania and the secluded valleys of the Pyrenean mountain range, local narratives recounted the maritime arrival of Mary Magdalene, purportedly bearing an infant, and spoke of her progeny who lived inconspicuously amongst the local populace. Such narratives, though frequently relegated to the realm of mere folklore, nonetheless, popular legends frequently serve as repositories for profound verities deemed excessively perilous for explicit inscription on written scrolls or pages. Furthermore, clandestine fraternities and esoteric associations emerged, some originating in the medieval period, others asserting a much more ancient provenance, which embraced distinctive emblems and ritualistic practices that appeared to resonate with a concealed legacy. Images of industrious bees, delicate lilies, and celestial stars, meticulously incised into stone. These recurring motifs, spanning numerous centuries, possessed multifaceted interpretations and origins that remained tantalizingly obscure. One is left to question whether these were mere coincidences of artistic expression, or rather, profound instances of collective memory transmuted into symbolic form. One compelling historical example is the Cathar movement in the Languedoc region, which faced relentless persecution and eventual eradication in the 13th century. Their theological doctrines diverged drastically from those espoused by the Roman Church, and prominently among the accusations leveled against them was the alleged possession of an esoteric gospel text, purportedly containing insights deemed excessively perilous for the Vatican to tolerate. One is compelled to ask if this text might have alluded to a sacred lineage, and whether their brutal annihilation served not solely as a punitive measure against doctrinal deviance, but also as a definitive act to suppress a perilous historical recollection. Repeatedly throughout history, an identical paradigm emerges, where the dominant, officially sanctioned narrative asserts a singular, accepted version of events, while beneath this veneer, an alternative account, partially concealed and partially obscured by the mists of time, nonetheless maintains a tenacious and unyielding presence. It appears as if the very fabric of historical consciousness resisted the complete relinquishment of the profound notion that Christ's enduring legacy encompassed not merely a spiritual dimension, but also a tangible corporeal lineage. Consequently, this memory persevered, not through overt challenge, but within the veiled recesses of obscurity, manifesting in the intricate stone carvings adorning monastic cloisters, the vibrant hues of stained glass windows in remote chapels, and the hushed ancestral traditions that subtly traversed the passage of centuries, much like an elusive wisp of smoke. The dedicated custodians of this profound recollection were not formidable military forces, but rather humble scribes, unassuming agrarian folk, and discreet guardians of hidden truths, individuals who consciously opted for circumspection over perfidy, and for clandestine preservation over absolute eradication. If indeed, the recollection they painstakingly safeguarded was entirely spurious, then why did the ecclesiastical hierarchy pursue its suppression with such unbridled zeal and relentless ferocity? It is conceivable that these guardians were not merely perpetuating an elaborate fabrication. Rather, they were meticulously nurturing the faint, prescribed pulse of a sacred lineage, one which the Vatican could, under no circumstances, permit to emerge into public awareness. Should the subtle allusions to Christ's purported lineage indeed have persisted through the ages, where might one discern their lingering imprint? Numerous scholars and theorists direct attention towards the Merovingian monarchs, the distinctive long-haired rulers of early medieval Francia, whose influential dynasty held sway from the 5th to the 8th century. Their historical saga is characterized by periods of undeniable splendor, profound enigma, and an abrupt, almost total obliteration from the annals of public memory. The Merovingian monarchs distinguished themselves significantly from their contemporary sovereign counterparts. They comported themselves not merely as conventional rulers, but as figures imbued with an inherent sacred quality. Eschewing the practice of tonsure, they firmly believed their uncut tresses served as conduits of profound spiritual potency. They asserted claims of mystical visions and extraordinary healing capabilities, and a perceived divine mandate for their rule that appeared to originate not from the sanction of the papacy, but from an authority far more primordial and intrinsically inherent within their very being. The heraldry and emblems they adopted were notably peculiar, featuring images of bees intricately carved into stone, lilies elegantly woven into their royal standards, and stars meticulously etched into their official seals. For certain observers, these motifs were merely conventional symbols of temporal authority. However, for a different school of thought, they constituted potent signs, resonant echoes of an archaic legacy, a genealogical line that extended its roots far beyond the ecclesiastical dominion of Rome, past the ancient land of Israel, and conceivably even to the very region of Galilee. The ecclesiastical establishment, for a period, extended a measure of forbearance towards them, considering that the Merovingians had embraced Christianity, and their dominion facilitated the propagation of the faith throughout Gaul. Nevertheless, their inherent autonomy and self-reliance proved to be a source of profound disquiet. They conspicuously refrained from offering complete subservience to Rome, nor did they depend upon the imprimatur of papal sanction to validate their regal authority. Their claim to kingship stemmed from an intrinsic right of birth, and the perceived potency of their lineage carried sufficient gravitas to profoundly discomfit the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Subsequently, the figure of Dagobert II emerged, destined to be the final undisputed monarch of his distinguished lineage. In the annals of 679 A.D., he met a violent demise. Historical records present conflicting reports regarding the precise weapon employed in his assassination, with some narratives suggesting a spear, while alternative narratives contend that his death was the result of a premeditated ambush, a meticulously planned assassination artfully camouflaged as a fortuitous accident. What remains unequivocally clear, however, is that his demise was abrupt, shrouded in suspicion, and remarkably advantageous. One is compelled to ask who ultimately benefited from this abrupt termination of royal power. The burgeoning Carolingian family, an ambitious lineage of influential mayors of the palace, stood poised in anticipation, having assiduously garnered the favor of the papacy through pledges of unwavering fealty to Rome in return for official recognition. Upon Dagobert's demise, their trajectory to power was decisively unobstructed. Ere long, Pepin the Short would receive his coronation with the explicit benediction of the papacy, thereby initiating a new dynastic era that inextricably linked the legitimacy of kingship to the endorsement of the Vatican. Yet the subsequent events unfolded with an even greater degree of peculiarity. The Merovingian royal house was not merely dispossessed of its sovereign authority. Its very existence was systematically expunged from historical recognition. Historical records became conspicuously mute. Royal sepulchres vanished without a trace, and the names associated with the lineage receded into profound anonymity. Most strikingly, Dagobert's legitimate heir, his son who was destined to inherit the royal mantle, seemingly evaporated from the historical narrative as though his life had never transpired. What compelling impetus drove such an exhaustive act of historical obliteration? Had the Merovingians been nothing more than an anachronistic ruling power, why would their memory not have been permitted to persist in some form? What motive necessitated their absolute interment from collective consciousness? Unless, that is, there existed within their very lineage a profound element that absolutely necessitated its suppression. Persistent legends intimate that the Merovingians asserted a genealogical connection, not solely to venerable ancient monarchs, but to Christ himself, a descent purportedly established through Mary Magdalene and a child conveyed westward following the crucifixion. Such a claim might appear preposterous to some, yet the sheer vehemence with which their historical legacy was expurgated strongly implies that the underlying stakes transcended mere political maneuvering. The enigmatic Merovingian conundrum persists, casting a long spectral shadow across the landscape of European historiography. A royal house perceived as excessively mystical, unduly autonomous, and perhaps possessing a sanctity too profound to be permitted to continue its reign. And if, indeed, their ancestral blood truly harbored the proscribed heritage of Christ, then their precipitous downfall represented far more than a conventional political upheaval. It constituted an integral maneuver within the Church's clandestine campaign against a genealogical line that it could, under no circumstances, countenance existing openly. The calendar marked the year 679, and the ancient forests of Lorraine lay enshrouded in a pervasive, heavy winter mist. It was within this evocative landscape, poised at the confluence of imperial dominion and enduring legend, that Dagobert II, recognized as the final authentic Merovingian monarch, confronted his destiny. His narrative unfolds not as the tranquil departure of a sovereign, but as the meticulously orchestrated suppression of a significant dynastic lineage. Dagobert was by no means a conventional sovereign. In stark contrast to pliable monarchs manipulated by courtly advisors and ecclesiastical prelates, he exuded an inherent authority, demonstrating an unwavering independence and an unyielding resolve. Having endured a childhood exile, secreted within an Irish monastic institution, he subsequently returned to assert his rightful claim to the throne. His period of rule, though brief, was characterized by an unmistakable defiance, further distinguished by persistent rumors that his ancestry possessed an intrinsic quality transcending mere regal legitimacy, something more archaic, perhaps even inherently sacrosanct. Inevitably, the day of his demise arrived. Certain historical accounts assert he was fatally wounded by a spear during a hunting expedition, while alternative narratives contend that his death was the result of a premeditated ambush, a meticulously planned assassination artfully camouflaged as a fortuitous accident. What remains beyond dispute, however, is the swift, conclusive, and politically opportune nature of the killing. One is compelled to ask who ultimately benefited from this abrupt termination of royal power. The burgeoning Carolingian family, an ambitious lineage of influential mayors of the palace, stood poised in anticipation, having assiduously garnered the favor of the papacy through pledges of unwavering fealty to Rome in return for official recognition. Upon Dagobert's demise, their trajectory to power was decisively unobstructed. Ere long, Pepin the Short would receive his coronation with the explicit benediction of the papacy, thereby initiating a new dynastic era that inextricably linked the legitimacy of kingship to the endorsement of the Vatican. However, Dagobert had indeed left behind a legitimate successor, his son Sigisbert, and it is at this juncture that the historical narrative takes a decidedly enigmatic turn. Sigisbert, by all rights of primogeniture, ought to have ascended to his father's royal seat. Instead, he inexplicably vanishes from all documented accounts. His appellation is barely referenced. His existence remains entirely undocumented by chroniclers, and his very memory was systematically expunged. For certain historical investigators, this unprecedented disappearance constitutes the most compelling piece of evidence. For what motive could justify the obliteration of a child's historical presence, unless that child's very existence posed a profound threat? Concurrently, enduring legends maintain that Sigisbert was covertly conveyed to the southern regions of France, specifically to the Languedoc, where his progeny purportedly continued to reside discreetly under assumed identities. If these narratives hold veracity, then the illustrious Merovingian lineage did not, in fact, conclude with Dagobert's assassination. Rather, it receded into the depths of obscurity, meticulously safeguarded in clandestine fashion, effectively concealed from the vigilant gaze of the ecclesiastical power that had seemingly orchestrated its eradication. This unprecedented act of historical excision speaks volumes, for it is customary for political adversaries to be vanquished in conflict, not utterly expunged from collective memory. Nonetheless, in the cases of Dagobert and his heir, one observes a calculated imposition of silence, as though the very scribes of history were explicitly commanded to avert their gaze. It is as if the Vatican's clandestine campaign against the purported lineage of Christ had achieved yet another significant triumph. However, triumphs predicated upon enforced silence are inherently imperfect and invariably incomplete. Within the secluded hamlets of southern France, persistent narratives continued to thrive. Tales recounting the clandestine rescue of a royal infant and of a sacrosanct bloodline that discreetly intermingled with the common populace of the region. These narratives, though frequently relegated to the category of mere folkloric embellishments, nonetheless contained within their fabric the disquieting potential for profound historical veracity. The demise of King Dagobert transcended the simple death of a monarch. It signified, rather, the amputation of a vital bough from an ancestral tree, a lineage whose profound origins were rumored to extend back through the annals of history, potentially even to the hallowed ground of Calvary itself. Even as this particular offshoot of the royal house was meticulously concealed from public view, or perhaps deliberately obscured, the fundamental trunk of that venerable tree, with all its deep-seated implications, was never entirely eradicated. Its essence, though suppressed, continued to endure, suggesting a resilience that defied complete annihilation. The narrative of history, much like the often fallible nature of human memory, is fundamentally devoid of true neutrality. It is invariably composed, sculpted, and meticulously edited by the individuals who possess the authority to wield the writing instrument. Consequently, when one meticulously examines the ancient folios of early medieval chronicles, an absence of information, a profound quietude, resonates with an impact far more significant than any explicit declaration. This profound quietude centered unequivocally on the abrupt and enigmatic disappearance of the Merovingian dynasty. For a span of 200 years, these distinctive long-haired monarchs had held sway over the expansive territories of Gaul. Their regal appellations were indelibly inscribed upon the currency of the realm, their legislative decrees codified within official charters, and their very existence intricately interwoven into the fundamental tapestry of the entire landscape. Nevertheless, subsequent to the passing of King Dagobert, the meticulous historical documentation concerning their lineage begins to noticeably waver and become indistinct. This venerable royal lineage, which had once asserted a formidable claim to divine sanction and sacred authority, descended into an astonishingly swift and profound state of historical obscurity. The official historical accounts, penned by the ascendant Carolingians, offer remarkably scant information regarding their predecessors, providing merely disjointed fragments, outright dismissals of perceived Merovingian enfeeblement, and selective anecdotes designed explicitly to diminish the significance and legitimacy of their prior reign. King Dagobert's direct heir, Sigisbert, experienced an almost complete effacement from the historical record. By all conventional expectations, his name ought to have been prominently noted, his life meticulously documented, and his succession to the throne potentially even formalized through a coronation ceremony. Instead, he simply dissolved into a profound and unsettling silence, creating the distinct impression that his very being, his inherent claim to power, constituted a latent menace too formidable to be openly acknowledged or recorded by the prevailing authorities. One is compelled to ponder what could possibly necessitate such an absolute and comprehensive act of historical obliteration. Typically, vanquished dynasties manage to retain some semblance of historical presence, even if merely serving as cautionary narratives for future generations. Yet the Merovingians were subjected to a fate far more severe than simple defeat. They were systematically expunged from the collective memory. Their sepulchres were allowed to fall into disrepair and neglect. Their royal lineage was deliberately disregarded, and even their distinctive emblems, the industrious bees, the elegant lilies, and the celestial stars, gradually receded from official usage, persisting solely within fragmented popular folklore and on obscure, half-forgotten architectural stonework. A contingent of historical scholars posits that this extensive suppression was primarily a matter of political pragmatism. The ascending Carolingian dynasty, in their ardent quest for undisputed legitimacy, found it strategically imperative to diminish the historical significance and perceived authority of their predecessors. However, the sheer comprehensiveness of this historical excision intimates a motivation far more profound than mere political convenience. It strongly implies a deliberate and calculated intention. If indeed the Merovingian monarchs genuinely bore the whispered legacy of Christ's bloodline, reputedly passed down through Mary Magdalene and her alleged descendants, then their very existence, by its inherent nature, would have posed an existential threat to the established supremacy of papal authority. One must contemplate the profound ramifications of living heirs whose very veins purportedly coursed with a divine claim to power. Envision the disruptive potential of rival monarchs capable of asserting their dominion not through the sanctification of a papal blessing, but by virtue of an inherent sacred lineage, a direct line to the divine. Such a subversive possibility, with its capacity to fundamentally destabilize the prevailing ecclesiastical structure, could not, under any circumstances, be countenanced. Consequently, a profound and deliberate silence was deployed, becoming the Vatican's most potent instrument of control. Official records were systematically purged of any inconvenient truths, and historical narratives were meticulously revised to align with the new order. Where a formidable dynasty had once proudly stood, there now remained only an echoing void, a deliberate absence. Yet, this very absence, this deliberate void, paradoxically narrates a compelling story in its own right. Its presence is discernible within the telling lacunae, in the abrupt, uncharacteristic blank intervals where significant names and events ought to have been recorded. It resonates audibly in the hushed tones of chronicles that meticulously detail peripheral events, while conspicuously omitting that which held the most profound import. And it is palpable in the enduring tenacity with which ancient legends continued to circulate, defying all attempts at official suppression and denial. These enduring legends spoke of royal progeny discreetly concealed, of sacred bloodlines meticulously safeguarded, and of profound truths interred far deeper than any physical sepulchre could ever contain. Consequently, this pervasive quietude is anything but vacuous. It possesses a palpable density, a deliberate gravity, resonating with the immense burden of what was systematically expunged. As every astute historian is acutely aware, it is frequently within these very silences that the authentic narrative truly commences its unfolding. With the comprehensive effacement of the Merovingian presence, the geopolitical topography of Europe underwent a significant metamorphosis. The resultant power vacuum, left by their abrupt disappearance, did not persist in its emptiness for an extended period. Into this strategic void and profound silence emerged the Carolingians, a burgeoning dynasty whose profound and enduring alliance with the Vatican was destined to fundamentally reconfigure the entire trajectory of Christendom. In stark contrast to their predecessors, the Carolingians derived no authority from hallowed ancient legends. They were instead eminently pragmatic individuals, skilled administrators of royal residences and formidable wielders of political influence, prioritizing tangible power over any ethereal mystique. Illustrious figures such as Pippin of Herstal, Charles Martel, and Pepin the Short exemplified this new breed of leadership, embodying potent combinations of astute strategy and formidable secular power. Nonetheless, the wellspring of their formidable strength resided not within an ancient, revered bloodline, but rather in the strategic forging of powerful alliances. They meticulously bound themselves to the authority of Rome and the Holy See in a reciprocal gesture, bestowed its sacred imprimatur upon their ascent to dominion. The papacy itself, beleaguered and encircled by a multitude of adversaries, was in desperate need of steadfast protectors and champions. The aggressive Lombards exerted relentless pressure from the Italian peninsula, while formidable pagan tribes cast menacing shadows along the burgeoning frontiers of Europe. Simultaneously, ambitious rival emperors vigorously contested suzerainty over the very heart of the continent. During such tumultuous and perilous epochs, a dynastic house demonstrating unwavering fealty to Rome was deemed infinitely more valuable than one whose authority was merely predicated upon ancient, perhaps apocryphal, legends. Thus, when Pepin the Short orchestrated the deposition of the final Merovingian figurehead king, the pontiff himself unequivocally endorsed and sanctioned this audacious act of usurpation. A profoundly significant and historically striking event subsequently transpired. In the year 754, Pope Stephen II personally anointed Pepin during a solemn and sacred ecclesiastical ceremony. This momentous occasion marked the inaugural instance of a pope bestowing a crown upon a monarch, thereby establishing a foundational precedent whose influence would reverberate and shape the course of European sovereignty for countless centuries thereafter. Royal legitimacy, from that point forward, no longer emanated exclusively from ancestral bloodlines. Instead, it definitively flowed from the sanctifying endorsement of the papacy. Through this decisive act, the Vatican had effectively guaranteed that its authoritative influence would thenceforth perpetually steer the trajectory of royal power. Yet a crucial inquiry arises: what rendered this particular assertion of ecclesiastical authority so immensely pivotal? It is plausible that this imperative stemmed from the persistent, albeit suppressed, memory of the Merovingian kings. If hushed intimations of their purported sacred lineage continued to circulate, then the Church felt an undeniable need for a new dynastic power that it could unequivocally direct and control. A ruling house whose authority would be intrinsically and indivisibly linked to and derived solely from papal approbation. For this specific and critical function, the Carolingians proved to be the ideal candidates. Their claim to authority was not inherited through the mists of ancient legend, but rather explicitly bestowed and legitimized by the venerable institution of Rome itself. This profound transformation transcended mere political maneuvering. It constituted a deeply symbolic declaration. Through the ceremonial anointing of Pepin, the Vatican unequivocally proclaimed to the entirety of the known world, "It is we who possess the ultimate prerogative to determine kingship, and it is we alone who bestow divine authority upon rulers." Consequently, ancestral bloodlines, regardless of their purported mystical origins or historical significance, were now relegated to a secondary status. The veritable seat of ultimate power and legitimacy was firmly established in Rome. Nevertheless, beneath the imposing grandeur of solemn coronations and the ostentatious pomp of ecclesiastical councils, an inescapable question persists. Did the Vatican's evident zeal to elevate the Carolingians simultaneously betray an equally fervent desire to enter the Merovingian legacy even more profoundly, thereby ensuring that no lingering memory of Christ's alleged heirs could ever pose a credible challenge to the newly consecrated ecclesiastical and political order? For if the Merovingian monarchs genuinely embodied that prescribed and potentially subversive legacy, then their replacement transcended mere political machination. It represented, fundamentally, an act of deliberate historical erasure, a final decisive endeavor to sever irrevocably the delicate thread of a bloodline that possessed the inherent capacity to transform the very foundations of the Church for all time. Concomitantly, the Carolingian dynasty ascended to prominence. The authoritative grasp of Rome became demonstrably more formidable, and the once vibrant memory of the sacred kings of France gradually receded, dissolving into the realm of mere legend. However, legends, as the grand narrative of history invariably demonstrates, possess an extraordinary tenacity. Even as the Merovingian lineage receded from the official annals, and the Carolingians flourished under the benevolent auspices of papal favor, subtle vestiges of the prescribed narrative persisted in realms inaccessible to the censor's ink. Not upon fragile parchment scrolls, nor within the solemn pronouncements of ecclesiastical councils, but indelibly inscribed within the enduring medium of stone. Within the ancient abbeys nestled in the verdant landscapes of Burgundy, throughout the majestic cathedrals adorning the Languedoc, and even in humble chapels discreetly tucked away amidst the rugged folds of the Pyrenees Mountains, a collection of enigmatic symbols mysteriously manifests. One observes clusters of industrious bees meticulously carved around ornate arches, elegant lilies intricately woven into the decorative capitals of columns, and celestial stars precisely etched into the austere walls of cloisters, locations where no astronomer would logically have cause to chart the heavens. These distinctive symbols recur with a striking frequency, giving the distinct impression that they were intentionally and subtly placed, perhaps as coded messages for the discerning few who possessed the acumen to interpret their true significance. The bee, in particular, was far from being a mere decorative motif. For the Merovingian monarchs, it functioned as a profoundly sacred emblem, a potent symbol signifying renewal, resurrection, and the promise of eternal life. When their royal dynasty was systematically expunged from the historical narrative, this distinctive bee motif ought, logically, to have vanished in tandem with their memory. Yet, it inexplicably endured, discreetly concealed within intricate stone carvings, subtly embroidered into ecclesiastical vestments, and making unexpected appearances in locations far removed from the purview of official heraldry. One is left to ponder. Did skilled masons and devout monks intentionally preserve this symbol as a clandestine act of remembrance, a subtle gesture of resistance, or perhaps as a hushed intimation of a sacred lineage that the omnipotent authority of Rome fervently desired to consign to oblivion. The enigmatic lily, too, blossoms with a profound sense of historical mystery. While it would subsequently gain renown as the fleur-de-lis, the iconic emblem of French royalty, its true origins are considerably more ancient, intrinsically linked to concepts of fertility, spiritual purity, and, crucially, a concealed lineage. In various chapels reputedly established by Mary Magdalene herself, the lily motif reappears with striking regularity, almost as if subtly prompting the faithful to recall that an alternative narrative, a different path to understanding, lies concealed beneath the Church's sanctioned historical account. And finally, the celestial stars, intricate patterns meticulously carved into vaulted ceilings, constellations seemingly mapped with an astronomical precision that no medieval artisan could possibly have achieved with the naked eye. Some depictions unmistakably delineate the formidable shape of Orion, while others distinctly portray the radiant morning star. One is left to ponder, was this meticulously rendered cosmic alignment merely an elaborate form of aesthetic ornamentation? Or did it, in fact, subtly allude to more ancient, profound mysteries, to royal bloodlines whose provenance was traced not simply through the linear progression of temporal history, but through the very fabric of the heavens themselves? Beneath the enduring solidity of stone, a profound silence reposes. Yet this very quietude possesses the remarkable capacity to communicate. The precise and deliberate placement of these enigmatic symbols unequivocally suggests a calculated intention. They are never positioned centrally or overtly. Rather, they remain marginal, discreetly concealed within obscure corners, or intricately etched in locations where only the most attentive and discerning observer would likely discover them. These are not grand proclamations. They are instead subtle, enduring whispers. It is conceivable that the skilled masons who meticulously carved these emblems were privy to clandestine narratives, tales discreetly circulated among monastic communities. Similarly, the devout villagers who gathered for worship beneath these very stones may have recounted ancient stories of Mary Magdalene's fabled arrival in France, accompanied by a child. Perchance, these enduring symbols were not, in fact, merely arbitrary embellishments, but rather deliberate acts of remembrance, subtle yet potent gestures of defiance against the Vatican's systematic historical obliterations. For while the formidable authority of papal decrees might successfully consign ancient manuscripts to the flames and effectively silence dissenting voices within ecclesiastical councils, they possess no such facile power to obliterate the enduring permanence of stone. Consequently, these potent whispers of a suppressed history persevered, not articulated in written words, but rather encoded within intricate symbols, largely concealed, overlooked by the vast majority, yet patiently awaiting the discerning gaze of those prepared to truly perceive them. And when one finally discerns these cryptic markers, a profound and resonant question ascends, much like the fragrant tendrils of incense. Were these motifs simply decorative embellishments, or did they represent deliberate messages transmitted across the chasm of centuries? Were they merely artistic expressions, or did they serve as silent testimony embedded within the serene arches of long-forgotten chapels? The very stones themselves appear to softly murmur their ancient secrets, affirming that the complete narrative has not been irrevocably lost. It has merely been meticulously concealed. By the advent of the Middle Ages, The venerable institution of the Vatican had evolved far beyond the confines of a mere religious edifice. It had transformed into a veritable empire of the spirit, its formidable influence extending its tendrils across the breadth of numerous kings and their respective kingdoms. Yet empires, irrespective of their spiritual or temporal nature, are not constructed upon the ephemeral foundation of faith alone. They are meticulously erected upon the bedrock of absolute control, and in this regard, Rome had meticulously refined the intricate machinery of its dominion with an unsettling, chilling precision. At the very core of this formidable apparatus of control lay the dreaded institution of the Inquisition. Originating in the 12th century, it commenced its operations as an instrument ostensibly designed to extirpate heresy. However, the precise definition of what constituted heresy was not invariably confined to a simple lack of faith in Christ. More frequently, it encompassed the espousal of a wrong Christ, an interpretation of the divine figure that diverged from the Church's sanctioned dogma. This wrong Christ was often characterized as a figure perceived to be excessively human, too intimately associated with Mary Magdalene, and too inextricably linked to the dangerous possibility of a direct biological lineage. The agents of the Inquisition, the inquisitors themselves, received rigorous training not merely in theological doctrine, but also in the sophisticated and often brutal arts of interrogation. Their meticulously crafted questions functioned as psychological instruments, sharp as any blade, specifically engineered to meticulously extract coerced confessions from the most obstinate silence. Individuals accused of possessing proscribed texts or of discreetly circulating perilous legends were unceremoniously hauled into somber courts, dimly illuminated by the flickering, ominous glow of torches. The accused faced judgment not from their equals, but from the formidable apparatus of the Roman Church itself. Should they refuse to admit guilt, the searing flames would assuredly complete the grim task that their resolute silence had failed to prevent. Edicts and pontifical pronouncements proliferated relentlessly, each successive declaration constricting the grip of doctrinal conformity. Whole populations found themselves denounced for their unwavering adherence to esoteric doctrines. A prime example was the Cathar community of southern France, unequivocally labeled as heretics and utterly eradicated during the brutal Albigensian Crusade. Publicly, their indictment cited their adherence to a dualist theological framework. Nevertheless, concealed within the formal accusations were faint murmurings of a book of love, an unrecovered sacred text rumored to encapsulate profound verities deemed excessively perilous for the Roman establishment. These perilous truths were perhaps intricately linked to the very lineage of Christ himself. One is compelled to question the genesis of such extreme ferocity. Why resort to incinerating hamlets, indiscriminately slaying multitudes, and obliterating whole civilizations? If these persistent legends amounted to nothing more than fanciful tales, if the notion of a sacred bloodline was merely unsubstantiated gossip, what compelling reason existed to marshal such immense power in a concerted effort to suppress it? The potential resolution to this query might be rooted in profound apprehension. For an august institution whose very foundation rested upon the unique and absolute divinity of Christ, the mere concept of progeny was anathema, a virulent poison. If a direct descendant of Christ had indeed endured, then the locus of divine authority might not be enshrined within the hallowed halls of the Vatican, but rather embodied in living individuals, silently traversing the annals of history across countless generations. Such a revelation would not merely constitute a formidable challenge to Rome's established dominion, it would utterly shatter its very foundations, leading to an irreparable fragmentation of its influence. Consequently, the intricate machinery of control continued its relentless operation. Ecclesiastical councils issued pronouncements, inquisitors tirelessly pursued their quarry, and historical repositories underwent systematic purification. With each passing generation, new components, fresh cogs, additional levers, and tighter chains were integrated into this complex apparatus. The Vatican, it seemed, was not merely engaged in the preservation of religious doctrine. It was, more profoundly, safeguarding itself against the persistence of historical remembrance. And yet, the sheer intensity and scale of its resistance intimate that a tangible entity, something truly deserving of obliteration, might well have possessed a genuine existence. For true power does not squander its formidable resources on mere phantoms or insubstantial specters. The elaborate administrative machinery of the Vatican, thus transformed into a formidable weapon, deployed not against hostile armies, but against the very fabric of collective memory. It waged war against a specific lineage, one it could never officially recognize, yet one it could also never entirely expunge. And in the profound silence that remained in the wake of its efforts, the lingering questions only amplified in their resonance. History, as a discipline, encompasses not solely that which endures through time, but equally that which has irrevocably vanished. When one meticulously examines the ecclesiastical archives, the monastic institutions scattered across Europe, and the ancient libraries once overflowing with parchment and ink, a singular, undeniable truth emerges with stark clarity. An inordinate quantity of knowledge and documentation has, regrettably, disappeared from the historical record. Certain instances of loss were undeniably attributable to natural phenomena. Conflagrations frequently ravaged abbeys, leaving behind nothing but cinders where extensive collections of erudition once resided. The relentless effects of humidity caused vellum to decompose and rot. Voracious insects incessantly gnawed at delicate pages. Indeed, time itself asserted its dominion, claiming that which human endeavors proved incapable of safeguarding. Yet, a distinct category of losses bears the unmistakable imprint of human volition. Actions that were explicitly deliberate, meticulously selective, and undeniably purposeful in their execution. Repeatedly, historical accounts recount instances of manuscripts being explicitly mandated for destruction, sacred texts not sanctioned by ecclesiastical councils, historical chronicles that diverged from the authorized narrative, and literary works that articulated perspectives too audacious concerning Mary Magdalene, or crucially, concerning potential heirs. A portion of these prescribed documents was incinerated publicly, their rising flames serving as a stark admonition to any who might contemplate similar transgressions. Others vanished with a quiet stealth, systematically expunged from official inventories, leaving behind only faint allusions and obscure footnotes as the sole testament to their erstwhile existence. Consider, for instance, the Vatican's own extensive archival collections. Deep within the ancient heart of Rome, countless miles of shelving remain meticulously protected through the centuries. Entry to these hallowed repositories is strictly limited, afforded solely to a select, privileged cadre of individuals Learned scholars who have been granted rare glimpses into its intricate catalogues frequently report observations of absent volumes, inexplicable lacunae in numerical sequences, and specific titles meticulously scored through with red ink. The critical question arises, were these items lost through mere happenstance, or were they intentionally suppressed, their contents deemed far too perilous to be permitted to endure? One might also reflect upon the ultimate fate of the Cathar writings. When the formidable stronghold of Montségur capitulated in the year 1244, popular legend asserts that a small, determined contingent of adherents managed to surreptitiously convey a priceless treasure beyond its walls. Some speculate this treasure comprised vast quantities of gold, while others contend it was a sacred tome, possibly a manuscript establishing a connection between Christ and an undisclosed lineage. Irrespective of its true nature, it subsequently vanished without a trace, as if the very ground had absorbed it, safeguarding it from the destructive flames of Rome. Furthermore, a multitude of fragmented clues exist, allusions within ancient correspondence to Gospels that are no longer extant. There are also mentions of spiritual traditions that inexplicably cease to appear in records after a particular century. The Gospel of the Hebrews, the Gospel of the Egyptians, the enigmatic Book of Love. Each appellation functions akin to a sealed portal, leaving humanity to ponder the profound secrets it once concealed. The systematic disappearance of these ancient manuscripts does not, in itself, constitute irrefutable proof of a hidden bloodline. It does, however, serve as compelling evidence of profound institutional apprehension. Established bodies do not resort to the incineration of documents unless those very papers pose a direct and significant menace to their authority. They do not undertake the painstaking erasure of historical records unless those records encapsulate information they absolutely cannot permit to persist. Consequently, humanity is confronted with an unnerving silence where articulate words ought to resonate, a profound void where a continuous historical narrative should exist, an inexplicable lacuna precisely where an unbroken succession of events is anticipated. Nevertheless, even amidst such extensive loss, the tenacity of memory persists. Enduring legends blossomed around these vanished texts, as if the deliberate act of their obliteration paradoxically caused them to radiate with enhanced brilliance within the collective imagination. That which was consigned to flames may indeed be physically lost, but that which was conveyed through hushed whispers has remarkably endured. And it is perhaps for this very reason that these crucial manuscripts disappeared, not because they lacked significance, but precisely because their import was overwhelmingly profound. For within the obscure recesses of historical inquiry, the conspicuous absence of written words can, at times, constitute the most resonant and potent form of testimony imaginable. By the advent of the 12th century, the persistent murmurs concerning Christ's concealed lineage acquired a novel cadre of protectors. These were formidable warriors, bound by solemn vows not only to engage in martial combat, but also to maintain an absolute and unwavering silence. They were officially designated the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, though history predominantly remembers them as the enigmatic Knights Templar. Officially, their sanctioned role involved safeguarding pilgrims traversing the arduous routes to Jerusalem and valiantly defending the sacred territories of the Holy Land. Yet, Beneath their distinctive white mantles emblazoned with crimson crosses, persistent legends insinuate the existence of an entirely different, more clandestine mission. Various accounts posit that they unearthed sacred relics interred deep beneath the venerable Temple Mount. Other hushed whispers claim, with greater intrigue, that they brought to light ancient manuscripts that had lain concealed for centuries within the desolate desert sands, treasures not composed of precious gold, but rather of invaluable esoteric knowledge. What precise nature did this extraordinary knowledge assume? Persistent rumors circulated, alluding to ancient scrolls that purportedly unveiled the more human aspect of Christ. This included potential evidence of his marital status, the existence of direct descendants, and, crucially, a bloodline that the established church had assiduously endeavored to obliterate from all historical consciousness. If indeed such profoundly significant documents genuinely existed, it is plausible that the Templars meticulously protected them, transporting them in profound secrecy across the breadth of Europe and concealing them within their numerous commanderies stretching from the bustling streets of Paris to the distant shores of Portugal. Initially, the Vatican extended a degree of tolerance to the Templars. Their utility was undeniable. They were immensely affluent and wielded considerable power, constructing formidable fortresses, ensuring the safety of vital trade routes, and even providing financial backing to monarchs. However, unchecked power inevitably engenders suspicion, and the Templars' burgeoning independence swiftly evolved into a perilous liability. They rendered obeisance to no earthly sovereign, acknowledging allegiance solely to the Supreme Pontiff. Yet even this direct fealty to the Pope eventually became a source of increasing disquiet and apprehension. By the dawn of the 14th century, specifically the early 1300s, insidious rumors of heresy began to circulate widely. Whispers spoke of arcane rituals and clandestine initiations, accompanied by grave accusations of idolatry, of desecrating the sacred cross by spitting upon it, and of harboring secrets so profoundly sinister they defied articulation. Officially, these comprehensive charges were presented as the legitimate justification for their utter annihilation. However, it is conceivable that the underlying truth was markedly different. Perhaps the most egregious transgression committed by the Templars was not, in fact, heresy, but rather their custody of a profound secret that the Roman Church could, under no circumstances, permit to come to light. On that fateful Friday, the 13th of October in the year 1307, the relentless machinery of historical obliteration once again descended with devastating force. Templars throughout France were apprehended in a coordinated sweep at dawn. Their vast accumulated wealth was summarily confiscated, and their leadership subjected to brutal torture until forced confessions were extracted. At the fiery stake, the venerable Grand Master Jacques de Molay met his demise amidst the consuming flames. Yet he faced his end with an unwavering defiance emanating from his very lips. Some narratives recount his final moments as an eloquent denunciation of the Pope and the King who had orchestrated his condemnation. Others maintain that he carried his profound secret unspoken into the inferno, allowing it to perish with him. What then became of the Templars' purportedly concealed knowledge? Certain adherents to this historical mystery contend it was surreptitiously conveyed to safety prior to the widespread arrests, transported by those knights who successfully escaped to havens such as Scotland, Switzerland, and Portugal. In each of these diverse geographical locations, Enduring legends persist concerning hidden caches of immense value, treasures not composed of precious coinage, but rather of fundamental and profound truth. Is it conceivable that the Knights Templar meticulously preserved tangible evidence of Christ's direct bloodline? Could their catastrophic downfall have been orchestrated not merely as a shrewd political stratagem by the French monarch, but also as an integral component of the Vatican's relentless, covert campaign against the persistence of historical remembrance? The definitive answers to these questions may forever elude our grasp. However, the enduring tenacity of these rumors, persisting for centuries after the order's catastrophic dissolution, strongly implies that the Templars transported far more than mere weaponry. They carried enigmatic shadows, hushed whispers, and perhaps the scattered fragments of a legacy deemed far too perilous for the established Church to tolerate. And even though their once powerful order was irrevocably shattered, their profound mystery continues to captivate, extending like a delicate yet resilient thread through the intricate labyrinth of historical inquiry. When the evocative term Grail is uttered, the vast majority of individuals instinctively envision a sacred cup, a hallowed chalice purported to have collected the very blood of Christ during his crucifixion. It is perceived as a mystical vessel ardently pursued by valiant knights, concealed within ancient fortresses and radiating with an ethereal luminescence within the annals of legend. Nevertheless, beneath this widely accepted and familiar iconography lies an alternative interpretation, one that fundamentally reconfigures the entire narrative arc of the legend. What if, indeed, the fabled Grail was never an actual vessel in the conventional sense? What if, instead, its true essence resided in a sacred bloodline? This compelling notion does not originate from fanciful speculation, but rather from the very etymology of language itself. In Old French, the phrase sang royal directly translates to royal blood. Over the passage of time, this specific phrase gradually melded and blurred into Sangreal, which subsequently evolved into the more commonly recognized Holy Grail. This subtle transformation involved both a rearrangement of letters and a profound shift in semantic meaning. What initially served as a direct allusion to blood, to a distinguished lineage, was subsequently re-envisioned as a tangible object of heroic quest. This transformation, though subtly executed, effectively veiled a fundamental truth deemed far too perilous to be articulated openly. Valiant knights ardently pursued the Grail within the enchanting narratives recounted by troubadours and embedded in the rich tapestry of Arthurian romances that proliferated across medieval Europe. These captivating stories shimmer with profound allegory, depicting a vessel that is concealed, vigilantly guarded, and meticulously protected, mirroring a lineage that is preserved, shrouded in secrecy, and strictly forbidden. Could it be, then, that beneath the celebrated sagas of Percival and Galahad, there resided profound echoes of an obscured truth, that the elusive Grail was not, in essence, a sacred relic from which to partake, but rather a distinguished family whose preservation was paramount? The layers of symbolism become considerably more intricate when one contemplates the figure frequently associated with the Grail narrative, Mary Magdalene. In certain esoteric traditions, she is portrayed not merely as a significant witness to Christ's life, but as the very embodiment of the Grail itself. She is depicted as the living vessel who bore Christ's sacred blood, not within a ceremonial cup, but miraculously within her own womb. The offspring of Christ, conceived and brought forth in profound secrecy, thus assumes the mantle of the living Grail, representing a vibrant legacy of flesh and blood rather than one of inert gold or material wealth. The ecclesiastical authority assiduously promoted the interpretation of the Grail as a chalice, a straightforward relic, safely distant and unthreatening, inspiring pious devotion without ever imperiling established doctrine. Yet the alternative exegesis, portraying the Grail as a sacred bloodline, was infinitely more perilous, for it implied that the profound legacy of Christ did not culminate with his crucifixion. Instead, it continued to thrive through living descendants who, conceivably, might still be moving silently among humanity in the present day. It is perhaps for this very reason that narratives surrounding the enigmatic Grail proliferated extensively throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, a historical epoch that precisely coincided with the formidable ascent and subsequent dramatic decline of the Knights Templar. This shared timeline suggests a deeper, more intertwined significance between these cultural phenomena. These compelling stories, woven with intricate threads of allegory and metaphor, might have served as sophisticated, coded vehicles for articulating profound truths and sensitive information that, due to prevailing socio-political or religious strictures, could not be openly or directly expressed. Such veiled communication often became a necessary means of discourse in perilous times. Indeed, it is plausible that gifted troubadours and perceptive poets meticulously embedded clandestine secrets within their lyrical verses. These melodic compositions, while outwardly providing popular entertainment for the broad masses, simultaneously carried subtle whispers and profound undertones specifically intended for those discerning few who possessed the acumen and insight to truly comprehend their concealed messages. Should the Grail be metaphorically interpreted as a sacred bloodline, then the illustrious medieval quest transforms from a mere pursuit of a tangible object into a desperate existential struggle for survival, specifically, the perpetuation of a hidden vital lineage. Consequently, the valiant knights who embarked upon this perilous journey were not merely chasing an ornate cup, but rather undertaking the solemn duty of safeguarding living heirs. And so, the Grail, a concept so frequently depicted as perpetually elusive, inherently eternal, and ultimately unattainable, may simply represent the enduring continuation of a significant legacy, a heritage that the powerful Vatican institution diligently and relentlessly labored to systematically erase from historical consciousness. Its very elusiveness might be a testament to the efforts of its concealment. Therefore, the Grail persists not as a relic that has been definitively discovered, nor as a treasure that has been irretrievably lost, but rather as a concept perpetually reimagined and reinterpreted through the ages. It exists as a narrative embedded within a larger narrative, a profound secret encapsulated within a powerful symbol. And perhaps it is precisely within the profound, deliberate silence of the ecclesiastical institution's steadfast refusal to acknowledge such possibilities that the Grail's authentic and most resonant meaning shines with its brightest clarity. True power is not solely predicated upon religious faith. It fundamentally relies upon the meticulous control of succession. The papacy, it is widely argued, possessed a more nuanced and strategic understanding of this crucial principle than any secular monarch or royal crown. From the earliest centuries of its establishment, The Roman Catholic Church assiduously labored to ensure that divine authority would flow through one singular, exclusive channel alone, through the venerable city of Rome, through its revered pontiffs, and through a meticulously constructed ecclesiastical hierarchy deliberately designed to remain unbroken by any claims of bloodline. But what if this carefully constructed, singular chain of authority could face a formidable challenge? What if, hypothetically, Christ had indeed left behind heirs, living descendants whose very genetic lineage would fundamentally and irrevocably challenge the Vatican's deeply entrenched monopoly on spiritual truth and its authoritative interpretation? This unsettling prospect represented the profound, existential fear that haunted the hallowed corridors of the Lateran Palace and permeated the solemn councils routinely convened within its grand, marble-clad halls. The mere notion of a Christ who had fathered children would inevitably give rise to powerful dynasties, each possessing an inherent, sacred claim to spiritual and temporal authority. This would entail the emergence of rival thrones, whose legitimacy would be divinely ordained not by the sanction of papal blessing, but by the unassailable authority of their direct, sacred lineage itself. In such a revolutionary scenario, potent kings might ascend to positions of power, boldly declaring their direct descent from the ancient lineage of Galilee. Similarly, influential queens might rule with an inherent, unchallengeable authority, rooted not in the ceremonial act of ecclesiastical coronation, but in the intrinsic divine power of their sacred bloodline. Within such a transformed global landscape, the ecclesiastical institution's formidable grip on power would undoubtedly falter, its pervasive influence diminishing significantly from actual binding rule to a mere ceremonial or ritualistic function. This, then, represented the profound, unspoken terror, the chilling apprehension intrinsically associated with the concept of an alternative, divinely sanctioned succession. Historical records provide tantalizing glimpses into the pervasive nature of this deep-seated anxiety within the Church. One might ponder the compelling rationale behind the Vatican's strategic decision to anoint and endorse kings of its own choosing. From the pivotal figure of Pepin the Short to the formidable Charlemagne, thereby intrinsically binding these monarchs to explicit papal approval and legitimization. Furthermore, why would the Church systematically orchestrate the erasure of powerful dynasties, such as the enigmatic Merovingians, whose perceived legitimacy appeared to emanate from an ancient source seemingly independent of Roman ecclesiastical sanction? And what profound, compelling motive would drive the deliberate incineration of ancient manuscripts that dared to portray Christ in the roles of a husband, a father, or simply as a mortal man, fully engaged in the human experience? Each of these decisive actions, when viewed collectively through a critical lens, unequivocally points towards an overarching, singular motivation: to meticulously ensure that no competing or challenging lineage could ever rise to prominence and assert its claim to divine authority, thereby undermining the Church's established order. Consider, for instance, the pivotal and highly symbolic coronation of Charlemagne, which transpired on Christmas Day in the year 800 within the majestic confines of the Grand Basilica of St. Peter's. During this momentous event, Pope Leo III personally placed a resplendent crown upon the emperor's head. This act transcended mere ceremonial grandeur. It served as a profound and unequivocal declaration to the entire Christian world It explicitly proclaimed that ultimate authority derived not from any purported bloodline or inherent birthright, but directly and exclusively from the ecclesiastical power centered in Rome. The message was unmistakably clear. No alleged heir of Christ, regardless of their claims, could ever effectively challenge or rival the divinely sanctioned champion, personally selected and elevated to power by the papacy. Yet, paradoxically, the very intensity and ostentatious display inherent in this ritual inadvertently betray an underlying insecurity and apprehension. Had the Vatican felt it necessary to project its formidable power with such audacious clarity, it was precisely because the ominous specter of an alternative succession perpetually loomed in the collective consciousness. This profound apprehension was fueled by persistent whispers of potential heirs, of clandestine families, and of sacrosanct bloodlines that consistently eluded the ecclesiastical institutions' firm control and scrutiny. The profound trepidation surrounding the concept of succession provides a compelling explanation for the sheer vehemence and unyielding nature of Rome's enforced silence on certain sensitive matters. Succession, after all, constitutes the very core principle of survival and continuity for any institution, particularly one built on claims of divine authority. To even countenance the remote possibility of Christ's direct lineage was to effectively usher in a future where the Vatican would cease to be the sole, unquestioned gatekeeper of salvation, where pontiffs would merely represent one among many voices, and where the authentic heirs of Christ would articulate their authority with the undeniable, inherent power of their physical presence and sacred heritage. Consequently, the Church embarked upon a form of warfare, a silent, relentless campaign spanning many centuries, a conflict waged not with bladed weapons and open combat, but with systematic obliteration and historical revision, not with military forces and armies, but with authoritative decrees and pronouncements. And always, throughout this prolonged and subtle struggle, the same persistent question invariably flickered in the darkness, much like a solitary candle flame bravely resisting the encroaching gloom. If indeed there was genuinely nothing substantial to be apprehensive about, then what rational or compelling explanation could possibly account for such an intense and pervasive fear of succession? Ecclesiastical doctrine serves as the foundational scaffolding of the Church, meticulously supporting the immense weight of shared belief that unifies millions of adherents into a singular faith, a collective voice, and a cohesive historical narrative. It is the architectural framework that gives structure to their spiritual world. However, what catastrophic repercussions might ensue when a solitary, inconvenient truth emerges, posing an existential threat capable of fracturing the entirety of this meticulously constructed theological framework and casting its very foundations into doubt. For the Vatican, the very notion of a direct bloodline descending from Christ was not merely an awkward or undesirable concept. It was unequivocally catastrophic, threatening to destabilize its entire authority. Official doctrine unequivocally proclaimed him as simultaneously fully divine and fully human, yet crucially, without any earthly progeny. His monumental sacrifice upon the cross was meticulously presented as the supreme, unrepeatable, and singular offering, serving as the exclusive conduit to eternal salvation. If, hypothetically, Christ had fathered children, that fundamental singularity of his being and mission would be irrevocably fractured and diminished. Consequently, the attainment of salvation would no longer depend exclusively upon unwavering faith in the ecclesiastical institution and its sacraments. Instead, it might potentially hinge upon a tangible connection to flesh and blood, specifically upon living descendants who inherently embodied both profound humanity and divine essence, thereby offering an alternative path to spiritual connection. One might pause to contemplate the far-reaching and profound implications of such a revelation for the established order of the Church. The sacred ritual of the Eucharist, with its solemn promise of Christ's corporeal presence and vital blood, would then be reduced to a purely symbolic act, losing its unique spiritual potency. This is because his authentic physical body and his veritable blood might, in fact, continue to flow through the veins of living human beings, making the symbolic representations less critical. Furthermore, the ecclesiastical institution's sacraments would no longer possess exclusive spiritual potency or authority. Authority, instead of being conveyed through the established priesthood and its ordained hierarchy, could potentially be transmitted through familial ties, and legitimacy might derive from inherent birthright rather than from formal papal ordination. This, then, represented the profound existential threat. The very existence of Christ's heirs would inevitably dismantle centuries of meticulously constructed theological doctrine. Every foundational creed, every catechism, and every solemn declaration of faith would be cast into disarray and uncertainty, causing the entire edifice of belief to tremble. The Vatican's established authority as the exclusive mediator between the divine and humanity would be fundamentally called into question. Why would individuals continue to prostrate themselves before Rome and its pontiffs if they could, instead, offer reverence directly to Christ's own living descendants, who might embody a more direct spiritual link? In response to this existential threat, the official doctrine became increasingly rigid and uncompromising, a bulwark against perceived heresy. Ecumenical councils unequivocally declared Christ's divinity as absolute and his humanity as entirely separate from any familial ties, thereby severing any potential earthly lineage. Mary Magdalene, a figure of potential significance and partnership, was deliberately diminished, re-envisioned as a mere sinner rather than a potential companion or equal. Furthermore, alternative gospels that presented differing narratives were summarily denounced as heretical, their narratives suppressed, and their words effectively silenced through concealment in hidden caves and destruction by fire. Each authoritative decree issued by the Church constituted a defense not merely of its theological tenets, but fundamentally of its institutional survival and continued dominance. Yet, paradoxically, enforced silence frequently divulges its own latent secrets and underlying anxieties. One must ponder why the ecclesiastical institution felt such an overwhelming compulsion to defend so vehemently against an idea that it steadfastly maintained never even existed. Why, indeed, the brutal violence and widespread terror of the Inquisitions, the impassioned zeal of suppression, and the ceaseless, systematic rewriting of historical narratives across generations? Such extreme measures often suggest a profound underlying fear. Some astute observers might contend that ecclesiastical doctrine exhibits fragility only when it harbors an underlying apprehension of contradiction or challenge. They might further suggest that the most vehement denials and forceful condemnations frequently served to mask the most profound and deeply rooted anxieties within an institution. The perceived threat to established doctrine was not confined to a purely theological dispute or an academic argument. It was, at its core, existential. To acknowledge the existence of a bloodline would be tantamount to systematically unraveling the intricate tapestry of authority and belief that Rome had painstakingly woven over many centuries. To accept the presence of living heirs would be to concede that Christ's profound legacy was not exclusively confined to the celestial realm, but was, in fact, vibrantly alive and present on earth, accessible outside the Church's control. And if this legacy were indeed alive and present on earth, then the ecclesiastical institution's self-proclaimed role as the singular and exclusive guardian of salvation would no longer be unique or unchallenged. It would face formidable rivalry. It would critically be rendered replaceable, thereby diminishing its absolute power and influence over humanity. It is therefore unsurprising that the Vatican engaged in this struggle with a ferocity suggesting its very institutional existence depended upon the successful erasure of this possibility. For in a profound and fundamental sense, it genuinely did. The stakes were nothing less than the Church's survival as the sole arbiter of divine truth. While conventional warfare is typically assessed by the scale of its battles, the unfurling of national banners, and fields tragically stained with the mingled hues of steel and blood, the ecclesiastical institution's most significant conflict unfolded in an entirely distinct manner. It was a war conducted not through the deployment of vast armies and open combat, but through enforced silence, not through overt conquest and military might, but through deliberate omission and historical manipulation. This protracted struggle came to be known as the Quiet War, a centuries-long campaign of systematic suppression and erasure intricately woven into the very tapestry of historical record, designed to control memory itself. Its genesis lay in the ecclesiastical councils that meticulously selected which gospels would endure and be canonized, and which would irrevocably fade into obscurity and be deemed apocryphal. It persisted through the brutal inquisitions that condemned and executed alleged heretics for merely uttering forbidden narratives or possessing alternative texts. The campaign was further sustained by authoritative papal bulls that denounced entire movements and theological perspectives, by archives systematically purged of dissenting manuscripts, and by powerful dynasties meticulously expunged from collective memory. In stark contrast to the resounding clash of swords and the visible devastation of conventional warfare, this particular conflict left no visible battlefields or physical ruins. Instead, its indelible impact manifested as pervasive gaps, blank spaces in historical chronicles where significant names ought to have been recorded, profound silences within libraries where once treasured books reposed, and unmarked tombs, as if the deceased themselves were deliberately denied any form of remembrance or historical recognition. Reflect upon the enigmatic disappearance of the Merovingian dynasty, which was not merely deposed, but effectively dissolved from recorded history, their origins obscured. Consider the tragic annihilation of the Cathars, obliterated not only physically, but also from collective memory. Their teachings utterly reduced to cinders and their spiritual movement eradicated. Ponder, too, the fiery destruction of the Knights Templar, their profound secrets ultimately consumed by the relentless tide of rumor and enforced silence, leaving behind only speculation. Every single one of these actions formed an integral component of a unified and relentless campaign, meticulously designed to ensure that no discernible trace of Christ's potential lineage or any rival source of authority could ever openly endure in the light of day. And yet, despite its pervasive reach and formidable efforts, the Quiet War was never truly brought to a complete or definitive conclusion. For silence, despite its formidable power to suppress, is inherently incapable of being absolute or entirely impenetrable. Where grand proclamations and official edicts ultimately falter and fade, persistent whispers manage to endure and circulate. Ancient legends subtly slip through the fissures of collective memory, resisting complete obliteration. Symbols intricately carved into cloister walls and embedded in art often outlast even the most stringent decrees. And occasionally, that which is deliberately erased paradoxically shines with greater luminosity and intrigue in its very absence. The Vatican's Quiet War thus unveils a profound and ironic paradox within its strategy. By exerting such ferocious and systematic effort to utterly eradicate the mere possibility of a sacred bloodline, the institution inadvertently ensured that the underlying suspicion of its existence remained perpetually vibrant and a subject of enduring fascination. By systematically silencing dissenting voices and suppressing alternative narratives, it caused them to resonate with even greater intensity within the realm of human imagination, transforming forbidden knowledge into compelling mystery. By assiduously erasing certain stories and historical accounts, it inadvertently transformed them into intriguing mysteries, perpetually awaiting discovery and elucidation by future generations. Perhaps this stands as the most profound irony of all. In its zealous endeavors to extinguish the very concept of Christ's potential heirs and any rival claims to authority, the ecclesiastical institution inadvertently guaranteed that the fundamental question would never truly expire or be forgotten. For in this specific historical context, silence itself transmuted into compelling evidence of something suppressed, and the very act of erasure itself evolved into undeniable testimony of a hidden truth. The Quiet War, therefore, possesses no definitive victory to publicly declare or celebrate. It persists, lingering still within securely locked archives, embedded within unbroken legends passed down through generations, and encapsulated within unresolved mysteries that continue to intrigue and perplex. And thus, the conflict endures, waged not through bloodshed or overt military confrontation, but through the ceaseless, restless curiosity of individuals who ponder, who persistently inquire why such a vast amount of information was meticulously erased, and who intuitively sense that silence is seldom truly devoid of meaning or implication. For perhaps the most significant battlefield is not a physical terrain on Earth, but rather the intricate and contested landscape of collective memory. And perhaps the most profound war is not one of overt conquest or subjugation, but rather a subtle, relentless struggle against the deliberate act of forgetting. Even amidst the devastating incineration of ancient manuscripts and the inexplicable disappearance of powerful dynasties, some subtle traces of the forbidden narrative steadfastly endured. These remnants persisted not primarily in written words, which could be burned, but rather in the eloquent and resilient language of symbols. Quietly, persistently, and with unwavering resilience, these emblematic forms manifested in carved stone and stained glass, in melodic songs and sacred rituals, effectively carrying collective memory through centuries when direct vocal expression was impossible or perilous. Consider, for instance, the humble bee. For the Merovingian lineage, this creature transcended its identity as a mere insect. It served as a profound emblem of eternity, of spiritual resurrection, and of a sacred, inherent order, whose origins were deeply rooted in something far more ancient and fundamental than the establishment of Rome itself. After their profound obliteration, the emblematic bee ought to have vanished entirely alongside those it represented, yet its presence remarkably endures. Meticulously etched into ancient cloister walls, intricately stitched into sacerdotal vestments, and conspicuously reappearing centuries later within the grand designs of royal heraldry. Could its persistent appearance be merely a decorative embellishment, or might it signify a clandestine acknowledgement of a lineage never truly extinguished? Similarly, one might ponder the ubiquitous fleur-de-lis, blossoming across the French landscape as an undeniable emblem of sovereign authority and kingship. Officially, this stylized lily was declared a symbol of immaculate purity, reverently associated with the Blessed Virgin Mary. Nevertheless, some discerning observers perceive within its elegant form the subtle resonance of Mary Magdalene herself, interpreting it as the lily of a concealed, sacred lineage, purportedly transported westward from the venerable Holy Land. When the monarchs of France proudly bore this emblem, were they genuinely asserting their unwavering allegiance to the Roman See, or were they, perhaps unwittingly, echoing a profound legacy that Rome had diligently striven to eradicate from historical memory? Within the secluded and ancient chapels of the Languedoc region, celestial bodies manifest in intriguing and enigmatic arrangements. Constellations are found meticulously carved into vaulted ceilings, while intricate mosaics are precisely aligned with the solstices. To the uninitiated observer, these exquisite formations appear simply as remarkable works of art. However, to those with deeper insight, these celestial depictions might serve as intricate cartographic guides, silent affirmations that the narrative of Christ was inscribed not solely upon the terrestrial plane, but also within the heavens, intimately connected to a cosmic rhythm that transcended the temporal authority of papal decree. Even through the preservation of ancient rituals, fragments of this enduring survival were maintained. The Cathars, for instance, whispered of a profound book of love, tragically consumed by destructive flames, yet its essence was remembered and passed down through hushed, clandestine conversations. The lyrical troubadours, in their evocative ballads, sang of the fabled Grail, a mysterious vessel, carefully concealed and diligently guarded, portrayed in their narratives as possessing a character far more human and earthly than that of a conventional holy chalice. Numerous secret fraternities diligently carried forward ancient rites, the profound origins of which they themselves might have only partially recollected over time. Symbols were thus discreetly transmitted from one hand to another, much like precious torches illuminating a path through the profound darkness of history. These significant signs were never ostentatious. They did not loudly proclaim their meaning or purpose. Instead, they patiently endured with a quiet persistence, as if inherently aware that subtlety offered the sole viable protection against the ever-vigilant and often punitive scrutiny of the Vatican. And yet, when these disparate elements are thoughtfully assembled, they collectively coalesce into a coherent mosaic. Bees, lilies, stars, ancient songs, and hushed whispers each contribute to this intricate pattern. Individually, Each piece might appear small, inherently fragile, and perhaps unremarkable on its own merit. But when viewed in their collective arrangement, they compellingly delineate the contours of a profound narrative, a story that steadfastly refuses to succumb to oblivion. If the sacred lineage of Christ truly concluded at Calvary, then why would countless generations dedicate such arduous effort to meticulously preserve these particular symbols? What compelling reason would prompt individuals to risk carving forbidden emblems into unyielding stone, weaving them intricately into delicate glass, or ingeniously encoding their meanings within the verses of poetry? Perhaps it was because the imperative of memory demanded such preservation, or conceivably, because the profound silence sought by suppressive forces could never genuinely be rendered complete or absolute. And so, these powerful symbols persistently survived, safeguarding their profound secret, not through explicit words, but through their very enduring presence. They continue to exist among us, subtly etched into the forgotten nooks of ancient chapels, cleverly concealed within the intricate designs of noble coats of arms, and radiating a faint, enigmatic glow within the timeless masterpieces of art from bygone eras. They remain silent, yet unyieldingly persistent, patiently awaiting interpretation. When one meticulously sifts through the profound silence that often shrouds historical accounts, the very existence of doubt itself metamorphoses into a powerful form of testimony. For if there were genuinely nothing substantial to expunge from the records, what conceivable motivation would compel the Church to expend centuries of tireless effort in its attempts to obliterate it? Doubt, like a persistent shadow, perpetually lingers at the periphery of every ecclesiastical council and every papal decree. One recalls the Council of Nicaea, where alternative gospels were decisively set aside and deemed heretical. There was also the terrifying period of the Inquisition, during which mere whispers of forbidden narratives were met with the brutal punishment of immolation. Furthermore, the elaborate anointing of kings was meticulously staged with such extravagant pomp and circumstance, specifically designed to unequivocally assert that all legitimate authority emanated solely from Rome. Each of these actions, on the surface, presented itself as an unshakable affirmation of certainty and absolute truth, and yet, beneath this carefully constructed facade of assurance, a subtle current of doubt persistently flickered. Established institutions seldom engage in conflicts with mere phantoms or illusions. Rather, they vigorously combat tangible threats. And the more relentless and fervent such a struggle becomes, the more one is compelled to ponder the true nature of what they so profoundly feared. Why would the Gospel of Mary be subjected to destruction by fire unless it conveyed a message or a voice deemed far too potent to be permitted to exist? Why were the Merovingian kings so thoroughly and systematically erased from historical prominence unless their royal blood carried a claim to authority that could genuinely rival the very power of Rome itself? Why, indeed, were the Knights Templar annihilated with such unbridled ferocity unless they possessed something far more significant and dangerous than mere financial assets and fortified castles? The Vatican steadfastly maintains that Christ left no direct heirs. And yet, the sheer vehemence of its persistent denial has consistently resonated with a volume greater than the original question itself. To many observers, this intensity of denial is inherently suspicious and raises further queries. For absolute self-evident truths require no vigilant guardians. They stand inherently unshaken, utterly untouchable, and devoid of fear. It is precisely fragile truths or perilous secrets that necessitate such intense and unyielding vigilance. In this curious manner, doubt itself transforms into a form of evidence. Not evidence of definitive certainty, but rather compelling evidence of profound possibility. The very act of expunging historical records inherently suggests that there was indeed something substantial to expunge. The enforced silence, paradoxically, serves as its own eloquent testimony. Legends, far from clarifying matters, only serve to deepen the prevailing mystery. Consider the families in southern France who staunchly assert their direct descent from a hidden child, or the clandestine secret societies that diligently guard symbols intimately linked to Mary Magdalene. Then there are the evocative troubadour songs that speak of the Grail not as a chalice, but as a vessel containing sacred blood. Are these mere fabrications, or are they profound echoes of an obscured truth that the Church assiduously labored to inter? Perhaps the elusive answer resides not in what has been overtly presented as knowledge, but rather in what was deliberately rendered unknowable. History, in this context, becomes a narrative meticulously sculpted by omissions. Archives are systematically purged of significant names. Priceless manuscripts are consigned to the consuming ash of bonfires. This represents the calculated and deliberate crafting of silence, precisely where the vibrant tapestry of memory should have unfolded. And yet, silence is never truly empty. It resonates with a profound depth, much like the solemn toll of a bell struck within a cloister late at night, its lingering echo serving as a potent reminder of what once existed. The Vatican may have succeeded in silencing individual voices, but it proved incapable of silencing the pervasive undercurrent of doubt. And ultimately, doubt itself may emerge as the most compelling witness, testifying that somewhere, concealed beneath centuries of systematic erasure, a forbidden truth once lived and breathed. Even though centuries have elapsed since the monumental councils and the brutal inquisitions, the fundamental question has never entirely faded into obscurity. It persistently lingers within the dusty confines of ancient archives, woven into the fabric of enduring legends, and unexpectedly resurfaces through new discoveries that rekindle the human imagination. Even in the contemporary era, hushed whispers concerning Christ's bloodline continue to surface, resolutely refusing to dissipate into complete silence. In the year 1891, a French priest named Béranger Saunière commenced extensive renovations on his modest church, nestled in the secluded village of Rennes-le-Château. What he ultimately unearthed remains shrouded in profound mystery. Parchments purportedly discovered hidden within hollow pillars, said to contain intricate genealogies, cryptic codes, and perhaps even tantalizing hints of a sacred and concealed lineage. Whatever Saunière's momentous discovery entailed, it undeniably brought him sudden and inexplicable wealth, prompted peculiar and eccentric behavior, and generated an enduring atmosphere of suspicion. To this very day, his unassuming church continues to be a pilgrimage site for seekers who firmly believe it conceals the ultimate secret of Christ's living heirs. In the 20th century, a collection of intriguing documents came to light within the esteemed Bibliothèque Nationale of Paris. These papers, collectively designated as the Dossier Secrets, put forth the astonishing claim that the Merovingian dynasty was directly descended from Christ and Mary Magdalene, and further asserted that a clandestine society, known as the Priory of Sion, had diligently preserved this profound truth across countless centuries. While many reputable scholars summarily dismissed these documents as mere forgeries, the fundamental question persists. Why were such extraordinary claims fabricated in the first place? And what intrinsic quality allowed them to captivate the imagination of so many individuals? Subsequently, a proliferation of books and speculative theories emerged. Some interpreters began to perceive the legendary Grail not as a literal cup, but rather as a symbolic representation of a sacred bloodline. Others meticulously traced intricate symbols and genealogies across the vast expanse of Europe, discerning compelling patterns in the historical record, precisely where official narratives had conspicuously left gaps. This compelling idea transcended the boundaries of academic scholarship, permeating into popular culture and inspiring countless novels, films, and an endless stream of public speculation. For a significant number of people, the sheer persistence of this narrative was, in itself, a powerful clue, suggesting that the memory of Christ's heirs could not be entirely obliterated, but merely ingeniously disguised within the realm of myth and legend. Even deep within the Vatican's own hallowed vaults, a pervasive air of suspicion continues to linger. The secret archives comprising thousands of shelves meticulously hidden beneath the ancient city of Rome remain largely inaccessible to the public and most scholars. One is left to ponder what profound secrets lie concealed within their depths. While select scholars are granted fleeting glimpses into these immense collections, they are never permitted access to the entirety of the vast repository. Rumors abound, suggesting the existence of locked-away gospels, papal letters that contradict or admit more than established doctrine permits, and crucial evidence long withheld from the devout faithful. Whether these rumors hold true or not, the very existence of such intense secrecy undeniably perpetuates and deepens the pervasive mystery. And then there are the families themselves. Quiet, unassuming names scattered across Europe who assert their lineage from ancestral lines far older than any reigning monarchy. Their genealogies are often intricate and obscure, yet some steadfastly maintain that their very blood carries a sacred thread, an ancient inheritance meticulously passed down since Mary Magdalene purportedly traversed the Mediterranean with a child in her care. Such profound claims are, by their very nature, impossible to definitively prove, yet paradoxically, they are also impossible to entirely dismiss. The modern world prides itself on its reliance on tangible evidence, on the rigorous methodologies of science, and on the verifiable nature of factual information. Yet, even in this enlightened age of reason, the enduring story of Christ's hidden lineage resolutely persists. Perhaps this is because every act of erasure inevitably leaves behind indelible traces, or perhaps because silence, in its profound depth, serves as its own eloquent and compelling testimony. Or it might simply be that the human heart yearns to embrace the belief that Christ's profound legacy did not conclude on a solitary hill in Jerusalem, but rather continues, concealed yet fragile, an unbroken thread flowing through the living veins of his descendants. And so the persistent murmurs endure, echoed in ancient parchments and modern papers, fictionalized in novels and cinematic narratives, and felt in churches where tourists kneel, driven not solely by faith, but by an insatiable curiosity for the profound mystery. The Vatican's relentless campaign may have succeeded in burying the story for a time, But in our contemporary era, the hushed whispers are audibly rising once more. Across centuries of systematic suppression, enforced through fire and profound silence, one powerful idea steadfastly refuses to perish: the compelling notion that Christ's sacred blood continues to flow quietly, invisibly, through living veins. It represents a thread as delicate and fine as spider silk, yet simultaneously resilient enough to stretch unbroken across millennia. Some theorists propose that it passed through the Merovingian dynasty, eventually receding into historical obscurity after the line of Dagobert was deliberately erased. Others contend that it continued its trajectory through lesser-known families, cleverly concealed beneath new names and diligently guarded by an intricate web of secrecy. This enduring thread, they argue, is intricately woven into the very fabric of Europe, tangled with numerous dynasties and marital alliances, yet it has remained fundamentally unbroken. Legends prevalent in southern France fervently insist that Mary Magdalene transported her child across the vast sea, subsequently establishing a sacred lineage within the verdant valleys of Provence. The Cathars, prior to their brutal destruction, were reputedly said to venerate a hidden gospel intimately linked to this very legacy. The Knights Templar, infamously accused of heresy, may have, in their secret capacity, safeguarded tangible proof of this profound connection. Each individual clue, each fragmented piece of evidence, points not towards an ultimate extinction, but rather towards an enduring survival. The symbols themselves persist as profound markers of this intricate thread. Bees, lilies, and stars are found meticulously carved into stone, elaborately embroidered into banners, and intricately woven into the fabric of ritual practice. They are not boisterous proclamations, but rather subtle reminders, silent yet potent testimonies that a hidden inheritance continues to exist. Even the very persistence of doubt serves as a compelling suggestion of continuity. For the Vatican's relentless efforts at erasure, its brutal inquisitions, and its unyielding denials appear to be a never-ending endeavor. Why engage in such an arduous struggle if the perceived threat has truly vanished into the distant past? Why employ such fierce silencing tactics if, indeed, nothing remains to be silenced? It is conceivable that the continuous lineage remains unbroken precisely because its destined trajectory never encompassed a severance. It may be that descendants of this ancient line still commingle within our contemporary society, their identities veiled in anonymity, their presence largely unobserved, their very names having faded from the chronicles of history. Yet, their inherent biological essence, their very blood, is posited to carry a profound, concealed truth that the formidable power of Rome was utterly incapable of seizing or subduing. Should this indeed prove to be the case, then the most momentous narrative of all is not meticulously inscribed in historical records or majestically carved into enduring stone, but rather profoundly embedded within the living organism, manifest in every inhalation, in every rhythmic pulsation of the heart of those who carry this clandestine inheritance. And though the individual names of these bearers may forever elude our grasp, the sheer, tenacious endurance of the legend itself provides ample corroboration. For a fundamental truth does not persistently resonate through the vast expanse of history unless its vital essence continues to thrive in the present. This imperceptible continuum, this unbroken thread, remains unseen by the casual observer, yet it profoundly interweaves disparate epochs, forging an undeniable link between the distant past and the immediate present. It serves as a poignant evocation that what the formidable power of the Vatican sought so fervently to obliterate may, in fact, not have suffered actual destruction at all. Instead, it might have merely undergone a process of deliberate concealment, patiently awaiting discovery by those possessing the discerning insight and willingness to perceive beyond superficial appearances. And if this premise holds true, then the compelling narrative surrounding the figure of Christ has not yet reached its definitive conclusion. Rather, it continues to unfold, enduring within realms of profound secrecy, obscured from public view, and enveloped in an almost sacred quietude. Inherent in the very nature of narrative is the undeniable inevitability of its culmination. Nevertheless, certain conclusions do not signify an absolute cessation. Instead, they manifest as periods of profound quietude, soft, purposeful, and perpetually unresolved. The compelling narrative concerning Christ's purported lineage finds its place precisely within these categories of deliberate, resonant quiet. The extensive and relentless campaign waged by the Holy See to systematically eradicate specific historical recollections proved to be utterly unyielding in its intensity and scope. Ecclesiastical councils formally rejected and excluded certain sacred texts, deemed to be heretical. Judicial bodies established to suppress dissent effectively silenced those labeled as heretics through rigorous inquisitions. Established dynasties were forcibly removed from positions of power, their claims to legitimacy undermined. Priceless manuscripts mysteriously disappeared from circulation, their contents lost to public scrutiny. Esoteric symbols were subtly incorporated into architectural structures, thereby concealing their true import. And yet, despite the monumental scale of these concerted endeavors, the profound query concerning this lineage persists, neither conclusively vanquished nor utterly eradicated, but merely interred beneath layers of intense suppression and enveloped in an enforced hush. Should there have genuinely been no substantive information or belief necessitating obliteration, what logical imperative drove such extensive and sustained acts of suppression? Conversely, if no legitimate menace existed, what justification accounts for the pervasive and enduring apprehension that spanned countless generations? Such profound inquiries ascend with an ethereal grace, akin to fragrant smoke unfurling within the hallowed confines of long-abandoned sanctuaries, permeating the very atmosphere and lingering profoundly even after the final echoes of devotional invocations have faded into silence. It is entirely conceivable that the profound quietude itself constitutes the most compelling form of corroboration, for paradoxically, an absence of sound can articulate volumes. It conveys the undeniable implication that a significant element once agitated the established order, an entity or concept that necessitated forceful and immediate quashing. Furthermore, it reveals that the collective recollection of events and beliefs could not be permitted to develop organically or without rigorous oversight. Instead, it demonstrably required meticulous administration, stringent regulation, and ultimately, systematic obliteration. And still, despite all efforts to suppress it, persistent murmurs of this veiled history continue to resonate, finding echoes within the secluded hamlets of Occitania in southern France, where devotional altars dedicated to Mary Magdalene radiate with the soft, flickering luminescence of countless candles. They are found amidst the desolate remnants of the Cathar stronghold of Montségur, where ancient tales of an concealed, invaluable hoard steadfastly defy extinction. They persist within the chronicles pertaining to the enigmatic Knights Templar, who are posited to have transported prescribed arcana into their subsequent banishment. And conspicuously, in the recurring motifs of the regal fleur-de-lis, the industrious bees, and the celestial stars, which continue to emblazon the ancient stonework across the European continent, serving as subtle yet potent emblems of enduring resistance. The extensive campaign waged by the Holy See might indeed have effectively quelled overt expressions and dissenting declarations, but it proved utterly incapable of stifling the boundless faculty of human inventiveness and conceptualization. Indeed, once human ingenuity is profoundly stimulated and set into motion, it invariably engenders a unique and potent form of perceived reality. For, irrespective of the empirical veracity of the purported lineage's existence, the sheer historical reality of its having been a source of profound apprehension and dread is, in itself, sufficient to perpetuate its enduring presence within the collective consciousness. Therefore, as this exploratory discourse draws to its conclusion this evening, allow the profound quietude to persist and extend its influence. Permit it to settle with a palpable gravitas, akin to the cumulative burden of countless epochs bearing down upon the present moment. And within this envelopment of quiet, one is compelled to ponder: did the ecclesiastical institution ultimately achieve victory in its protracted conflict? Or was its endeavor ultimately unsuccessful? Did it effectively enter the purported lineage into oblivion? Or did its very efforts inadvertently fortify its existence by transmuting it into an enduring mythos? The definitive resolution to these profound inquiries will not emerge from the meticulous examination of historical repositories, nor from the hallowed confines of grand ecclesiastical edifices, nor from the issuance of official proclamations. Instead, it resides exclusively within those secluded locales, characterized by their profound tranquility, within the persistent, subtle murmurs that steadfastly resist attenuation, and within the obscured recesses where the vital essence of recollection continues to respire. And it is entirely plausible that even in the contemporary era, the fabled lineage continues its existence amidst humanity, its presence unperceived, its significance unrecognized, yet undeniably extant. The clandestine and relentless campaign waged by the ecclesiastical authority might indeed have succeeded in interring the underlying verity, yet, paradoxically, the very quietude it imposed continues to articulate its own compelling narrative.